She was supposed to be his enemy, and for 3 years she was. But on the night Logan Pierce found Victoria Kane sitting alone in the rain, mascara running, heels broken, pressing a bloodied palm against her silk blouse. Every wall he'd built between them cracked straight down the middle. He could have walked past. He almost did. What he chose instead would cost him everything he thought he knew about rivalry, ambition, and the terrifying possibility that the one person who understood him most was the same one he'd spent 3 years trying to destroy. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like and stay until the end. You're going to want to see how this one lands. The rain started the way bad news always did in this city. Quietly, then all at once. By the time Logan Pierce stepped out of Mercer and Loft's glass lobby, the streets of downtown Chicago had turned into something between a mirror and a river. Headlights bleeding orange and red across the wet pavement, taxis honking at nothing, pedestrians walking with that hunched, defeated posture of people who hadn't checked the weather and were now paying for it. Logan stood under the overhang for a moment and considered his options. His car was parked 3 blocks east. His jacket was already damp from the champagne someone had spilled on him 40 minutes ago inside the party. His tie, a charcoal Tom Ford that his daughter Maya had picked out for him last Christmas because she said it made him look like a serious person, Daddy, was probably ruined. He loosened it anyway, undid the top button of his shirt, breathed out slow. Inside, the celebration was still going. He could hear the muffled bass of whatever playlist the DJ was cycling through. Mercer and Loft had closed a regional partnership deal worth roughly $11 million, and the partners had rented out the entire 3rd floor of a rooftop bar to mark the occasion. Open bar. Catered food. A view of the city that would have been stunning if not for the downpour pressing itself against every pane of glass. Logan had stayed exactly as long as he needed to, shook the right hands, laughed at the right moments, said something memorable to Davidson, one of the senior partners, about the next quarter's positioning strategy. Smiled when Priya from accounts clapped him on the shoulder and called him the best strategic mind in the building. He'd gotten good at knowing when his presence had served its purpose. Now he just wanted to get to his car, get home, and be there when Maya woke up from whatever dream she was having. She was 7 and went through phases. Last week it had been dinosaurs. This week it was somehow competitive baking shows. She liked to explain the judging criteria to him over breakfast with the seriousness of a tenured professor. He stepped out into the rain, resigned to getting wet. He made it half a block before he saw her. At first, he genuinely didn't recognize her. That was the thing he'd think about later, how completely he almost walked past a woman he'd spent 3 years being obsessed with in the way rivals are obsessed with each other, tracking her moves, dissecting her strategy, losing sleep over the accounts she won, and he didn't. She was sitting on the curb between 2 parked cars, almost hidden from the main sidewalk. Knees bent, one hand pressed flat against the concrete like she was checking whether the ground was still solid. The other hand was pressed against her side, against that pale silk blouse he'd noticed earlier in the evening. Because, of course, he'd noticed. She'd walked through the event like a controlled detonation. Every person in the room had tracked her without meaning to. Now that same blouse was dark at the ribs where something had soaked through it. Rain, maybe. Or not. Her shoes, those sharp-heeled things that added 3 inches and looked engineered to project power, were sitting beside her on the curb. One of the heels was snapped clean off. She was in her bare feet on the wet concrete, and her hair, which had been up in that severe architectural knot she always wore to industry events, was half down and plastered against her cheek. She had her forehead pressed against her raised knees. She wasn't moving. Logan stopped walking. "Keep going," said the part of his brain that had learned early in his career to protect himself first. "She's fine. Or if she's not, she's Victoria Kane. She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet. That's the whole thing about her." He took 1 step toward the street to go around her. Then she made a sound. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sob or a cry or anything he could have identified easily and filed away. It was quieter than that, a sharp, shaky exhale. The kind of sound a person makes when they've been holding something in their chest for a very long time and some small piece of it just slipped loose. Logan Pierce had been a single father for 4 years. He knew that sound. He'd made it himself, in parking garages and bathroom stalls, and once in a Walgreens at 2 in the morning, in front of a display of birthday cards on the first anniversary of his ex-wife leaving. He turned around. Up close, he could see that the dark stain on her blouse was coming from her palm. Her right hand, still pressed against the silk, had a cut across it, not deep but wide, bleeding slow. She'd probably caught it on something. The edge of a planter, maybe, or a broken piece of sidewalk grating. There was a smear of blood on her wrist, too, where she'd wiped it without thinking. He crouched down a few feet away, which felt like the right distance for a person who might not want to be approached. Victoria. Nothing. The rain kept falling. Hey. He tried again, softer. Victoria Kane. Her head came up slow, and the look she gave him. God, he'd seen Victoria Kane in a lot of configurations. Across conference tables, head tilted just slightly like she was already 3 moves ahead. Presenting to clients with that particular brand of controlled warmth she'd perfected, engaged enough to be personable, sharp enough that nobody forgot who was in charge. He'd seen her annoyed, amused, aggressively pleasant, and once, memorably, furious, after he'd undercut her on the Henderson account with a counter-proposal that she'd later called aggressive in a trade press interview, which he was fairly sure was the politest word she'd chosen from a longer list. But he had never seen her look like this. Her eyes were red at the edges. Mascara had tracked 2 dark lines down her face and dried there. She was looking at him the way someone looks when they're trying to work out whether they're hallucinating. "Pierce," she said. Her voice was flat and stripped of everything. "Of course. You're bleeding." She looked down at her hand like she'd forgotten about it. "I noticed. Do you have anything to—" "I'm fine. You're sitting on a wet curb in the rain with a cut on your hand and no shoes. I'm aware of my circumstances." He almost smiled at that, because it was so completely exactly her. Defensive precision, even in the middle of falling apart. He fished in his jacket pocket and came up with a folded handkerchief, the old-fashioned kind his father had carried, and Logan had picked up the habit somewhere in his 30s, without quite meaning to. He held it out. She stared at it like it might be a trick. "It's a handkerchief," he said. "Not a legal document. You don't have to sign anything." She took it, pressed it against her palm without a word, looked away from him at the street. Logan stayed where he was, crouched at her level, which was already making his knees ache in the way that everything below the waist reminded him he was 32 and had been sitting at a desk for a decade. "What happened?" he asked. "I tripped." She paused. "On the stairs coming out of the side exit. Where's your team?" "Still inside." "Did you tell anyone?" "No." The word landed hard. "I didn't tell anyone." He looked at her for a moment. "Why not?" She turned her head and looked at him, and there was something complicated happening behind her eyes, something he couldn't quite name, like she was running through options and finding them all unsatisfactory. "Because I'm Victoria Kane," she said, and the way she said it, flat, almost tired, it wasn't arrogance. It was something much heavier than that. It sounded like a sentence, like a thing she'd been handed a long time ago that she'd decided to carry without complaining, and now it was very, very heavy. Logan didn't say anything. The rain was getting worse. He stood up, looked down at her. "My car's 2 blocks east. I'll drive you home." "That's not necessary. Your shoes are broken. I'll call a car. In this weather, the wait is going to be 40 minutes minimum." He pulled out his phone, opened the rideshare app, and showed her the screen. 43 minutes, surge pricing. "I'm offering you 20. She looked at the screen, then at him, then at the handkerchief wrapped around her hand, which was already showing a small bloom of red at the center. "This doesn't mean anything," she said. "I know. We're still competitors." "I know, Victoria." He extended his hand to help her up. "Come on." She looked at his hand for what felt like a long time. Then she took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and for just a second, one small, unguarded second, she grabbed his arm to steady herself, and he felt her lean her weight into him the way someone does when they've been standing on their own for too long and suddenly can't quite remember how anymore. Then she straightened. Let go. Became Victoria Kane again, or the best approximation she could manage in bare feet on a wet sidewalk in the rain. "My shoes," she said. He picked them up, held them by the straps. didn't comment on the broken heel. They walked to his car without talking, and he noticed she walked carefully, placing each bare foot like the pavement might give way. And he noticed he slowed his pace without thinking about it. And he noticed she didn't thank him for that. And he noticed he didn't need her to. Told. His car was a dark navy Volvo that smelled like Maya's strawberry chapstick and old coffee, and the particular scent of a car that gets used for school drop-offs and grocery runs and late nights driving nowhere when a person needs to think. He opened the passenger door and Victoria Kane lowered herself into the seat with the careful movements of someone whose body hurt more than she was admitting. He got in the driver's side, adjusted the heat, pulled out of the space. "Address?" he asked. She gave him one. North side, not far. They drove in silence through rain-slicked streets. The windshield wipers kept time. The city moved past them, that particular version of Chicago at night that was all refracted light and wet surfaces and people running between awnings. Logan kept his eyes on the road. "The Henderson account," Victoria said suddenly. He glanced at her. "What about it?" "Your counterproposal, the one that undercut mine." She was looking at the window, not at him. "I read it 3 times. I know, your assistant mentioned it. My assistant talks too much." A pause. "It was a good proposal." He waited. "Not better than mine," she added, "but good." "You won the account anyway." "I always win the account." There was no triumph in it, just fact. That's the problem. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he said nothing. They drove another few blocks. He turned onto her street, quieter up here, brownstones and older trees that still had most of their leaves. "You can drop me at the corner," she said. "I'll pull up to the building." "Pierce, you have no shoes and it's still raining," he said. "I'll pull up to the building." She was quiet. He pulled up to the building. It was a nice building, not flashy but solid, the kind of building that cost serious money while pretending not to. He put the car in park. Neither of them moved immediately. "Thank you," she said, quietly, like the words cost her something. "It's a 20-minute drive." "You know that's not what I mean." He did know. "I'm going to wait until you get inside." "That's not... Humor me." She turned and looked at him full on for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. Up close, in the low light, without the industry event armor fully assembled, she looked younger than 30. She also looked exhausted in a way that sleep probably couldn't fix, the kind of tired that came from a specific weight sustained over a long time. "Why are you being like this?" she asked, and she wasn't being combative. She genuinely wanted to know, in the same way someone asks about a thing that doesn't make sense to them. Logan thought about it honestly. "I don't know," he said. Seemed like the right thing. She studied him for another moment. Then she opened the door and got out, and he watched her walk barefoot across the wet sidewalk to the building entrance, and the doorman inside pulled the door open before she reached it, and right before she stepped inside, she turned around and looked back at his car. He didn't know if she could see him clearly through the rain-covered windshield. She turned and went inside. He sat there for a second, in his damp jacket, in his ruined tie, in the smell of strawberry chapstick and old coffee. Then he put the car in drive and headed home. He didn't examine what he was feeling. He'd gotten good at that, too. He told himself he'd forget about it by morning. He told himself this the way a person tells themselves they'll get an early night's sleep or stop checking their email after 8, with the full knowledge that they probably won't, but the optimism to try anyway. By 7:15 the next morning, Maya was in the kitchen in her pajamas explaining to him, with complete seriousness, why the judges on last night's episode had made an incorrect decision about the croissant competition, and Logan was making her scrambled eggs with exactly the right amount of cheese, and the rain was gone, and the city outside the kitchen window was doing that post-storm glittering thing that Chicago did when it was trying to make up for itself. "The croissants had too many layers," Maya was saying, spinning on the bar stool. "You can't have too many layers, that's not a thing." "Who told you that?" "Marcus." Marcus was her best friend from school, 7 years old and apparently also a croissant expert. He said his mom makes them, and they always have exactly the right layers. How many layers is exactly the right amount? Maya considered this with the gravity of a judge herself. "Enough." Logan put the plate in front of her. Helpful. You're welcome. She picked up her fork. Daddy, do you have work today? I have a call at 9. Then some stuff in the office. He poured himself a second coffee. Mrs. Patterson is picking you up from school. I know. She ate a bite of eggs, made a face. More cheese. You already have a lot of cheese. More cheese makes everything better. He couldn't argue with that. He added more cheese. He made it through the morning, through the 9 o'clock call, through the commute, through the first 2 hours in the office, responding to emails and reviewing the report Priya had sent over about Q4 projections before he let himself think about it. He pulled up Victoria Kane's company profile. Not because he was tracking her. He checked it regularly, the way you tracked a competitor, looking at her team page and her recent wins and the quarterly interviews she gave. Basic industry awareness. Today, he scrolled past the professional headshot at the top, that composed, direct gaze photograph that made her look exactly like what she was. And he thought about a woman sitting on a wet curb with her forehead on her knees and one hand pressed to her side. He thought, there's something there that doesn't add up. He'd worked next to Victoria Kane in this industry for 3 years, not together, across from each other, which was a different thing entirely. He knew her professional reputation the way a chess player knows an opponent's opening gambits, thoroughly and with respect. She was brilliant, relentless, and she operated with a precision that was genuinely rare. Every campaign her company ran had that quality of looking inevitable. In retrospect, of course that was the right move. How did anyone else not see it? But she ran a company with 40-something employees. She pitched personally to every major client. She was at every significant industry event. She'd given the keynote at the Midwest Marketing Summit last spring. She published a quarterly strategy letter that half the industry read, whether they admitted it or not. And she did all of this at 30 years old. Logan was 32 and genuinely, honestly could not figure out when she slept. Now he was thinking about last night in a different way. Not the part where he'd helped her, but the part she'd said that he'd filed away. Because I'm Victoria Kane. Not, I didn't want to fuss or I was embarrassed. Not my team would have panicked. She'd said it like it explained everything, like being Victoria Kane was both the reason and the burden simultaneously. He had no idea what was underneath that. He probably, he told himself, wasn't going to find out. She called him 4 days later. He was in a parking garage on the lower level, leaning against the side of his car, eating a sandwich because he'd had back-to-back meetings since 8, and it was now 2:15 and he was genuinely starting to feel it. His phone buzzed and he looked at the screen. V. Kane. Mobile. He stared at it. She'd sent her contact over to his phone that night, said for billing purposes with the dry humor of someone who was almost smiling, and he'd saved it and assumed she'd never actually use it. He answered. Kane. Pierce. A pause on her end. I wanted to call and... Another pause, shorter. The hand is fine, in case you were going to ask. I was going to ask. I know, you're the type. She said it without judgment, almost clinically. 4 stitches. I went to urgent care the next morning. 4 stitches. It was deeper than it looked. It doesn't matter, it's fine. He thought about the handkerchief. He hadn't been thinking about the handkerchief, but now he was. Okay. I also wanted to... She stopped. He could hear something in the background of wherever she was. Faint office sounds, a door closing. Thank you, she said finally. For the other night. For not making it into something. Logan thought about what he could say. He had several options. A deflection, a light acknowledgement, the kind of thing you said to end a conversation cleanly without either person having to feel much. Instead, he said, Are you okay? Silence. Victoria. I'm fine, she said, and then, almost before the word finished, I'm always fine. That's not actually the same as okay, but it's what I have right now. He stopped eating the sandwich. What does that mean? It means I'm managing. A short breath. It means some days are harder than others, and that particular day was a harder one, and I don't usually let people see that. I know you don't. I'm not... She stopped again. He was starting to understand that these pauses were where she was making decisions, cutting things she'd started to say before they got loose. I don't need anything from you, Pierce. I didn't call because I know why you called, he said. Another pause. You called because you needed to close the loop, he said, because leaving it open would bother you. You wanted to say thank you, confirm the hand was fine, and make sure neither of us were going to treat this like it was a bigger deal than it was. A very long pause. That's irritating, she said. I've been told. How did you, because I'm the same way, he said simply. When someone helps me with something, I have to go back and close it. Otherwise, it just sits there. He heard something shift on her end. Not a sound exactly, just a change in the quality of the silence, like something relaxed that had been held tight. Okay, she said quietly. Loop closed. Loop closed, she agreed. Neither of them hung up. Logan looked at his half-eaten sandwich and put it down on the roof of the car. You don't have to tell me anything, he said, about whatever was going on that night. You don't owe me an explanation. I know I don't. But I'm around. If it helps to talk to someone who isn't going to turn it into industry gossip or treat you differently because of it. You're my competitor. I'm aware. You literally presented a counterproposal to a client I know what I did, Victoria. Silence. Why would you offer that? She asked, and there was something real in the question, like she was genuinely trying to understand the algorithm. Logan thought about it. About Maya in the kitchen this morning, asking him if being mean to someone you didn't like was the same as being mean to someone you didn't know, because Marcus had said those were different, but Maya wasn't sure, and she wanted his opinion. He'd said he thought meanness was meanness regardless of how well you knew the person, and she'd nodded and said, yeah, that's what I thought, with the satisfaction of someone whose answer has been confirmed. He thought about sitting on the floor of Maya's room at 2 a.m, 6 months after her mother left, while Maya slept and he just needed to be close to something that still made sense. Because you were sitting on a curb in the rain, he said, and that's enough. She didn't call again for 2 weeks. Then she called 3 times in a week, each time for something ostensibly professional, a question about a vendor they'd both used, a comment about a competitor's new campaign, once a thing about whether he knew anything about a specific data analytics firm she was considering partnering with. Each conversation drifted, eventually, somewhere else. She'd ask about his read on the industry, and he'd give it, and she'd push back, and he'd push back, and they'd end up in these extended debates that neither of them were supposed to be enjoying as much as they were. He was discovering, extraordinary to talk to. Not in the way he'd expected. He'd expected sharpness, and she had that, but she also had this unexpected dry humor that she deployed like a scalpel. Small incisions. She'd make a joke and then immediately continue the conversation as if she hadn't, and he'd still be catching up to the punchline. She also asked questions no one else thought to ask him. Not about the campaigns or the strategy or the industry, about the thinking underneath those things, why he'd made a particular creative choice, what he'd been trying to solve that nobody had seen. She listened to his answers in a way that felt active rather than polite. He started looking forward to the calls more than he should have. He didn't do anything with that information. The day he found out about her brother, it wasn't from her. It was from a woman named Darla who worked at the shared printing service that half the small agencies in the building used and who knew more about everyone's business than any of them realized, not because she was nosy, but because she was there, quietly, while everyone talked around her like furniture. Logan was picking up a bound proposal deck, and Darla was sorting packages at the back counter, and she said, not looking up, "Saw your name next to Kane Company on the schedule. You two working together now?" "Competing," Logan said. "Still competing." She sorted another package. "She's a hard worker, that one. In here most weeks, sometimes twice. Always professional." A pause. "Saw her on the phone once, in the hallway. She didn't see me. She was talking to someone. Hospital, I think from the sound of it. She was trying real hard not to cry and doing about a 60% job of it." Logan stopped. Darla kept sorting. "None of my business. Just thought it's easy to only see people one way." He thought about that on the drive back to the office. He thought about it through his afternoon calls. He thought about it when he got home and Maya ran at him from the living room and he caught her and held on a little longer than usual, feeling the solid, real weight of her. That night, after she was asleep, He sat in the kitchen and typed Victoria's name into a search bar and added, family, brother. He found it in a local news piece from 4 years ago. A car accident on the I-90. Ethan Kane, 23 at the time, had been the passenger. The driver had run a red light. Ethan had been airlifted to Northwestern Memorial. The article described the injuries in clinical language that didn't quite capture what those injuries meant for a 23-year-old's life. Spinal, significant, requiring long-term care. Victoria would have been 26, just starting to build what was now a 40-person company. He sat with that for a while. He thought about what she'd said. I'm always fine. That's not actually the same as okay. He thought about how you'd learn to say that, how long it would take, what it would cost you every single time you said it, and kept moving forward anyway. He closed his laptop, didn't call her, didn't bring it up. Some things you had to wait to be told. He made himself a note in his head to be patient. She told him herself, 6 days later. They were on the phone, and it was late, past 10 his time, which meant she was probably still at the office. And they'd already covered the thing they'd started the call with and drifted into the usual gravitational pull of just talking. And she said suddenly, I have to leave early tomorrow. Early how? 7. A pause. Ethan has a therapy appointment at 8 and his usual driver is sick. My assistant was going to cover, but she has a thing with her kid and I can't ask her to. She stopped. Ethan is my brother, she said carefully. He was injured a few years ago. There's a level of ongoing care. Logan didn't say anything for a moment. You don't have to explain, he said. I know I don't. I'm choosing to. Another pause. I don't talk about it. Not in the industry. People would... She didn't finish that sentence. He understood the one she'd left out. People would treat me differently. People would see weakness. People would use it. Okay, he said. He's doing well, actually, relative to... He's made progress. And he could hear under the clinical phrasing something that was just pride, raw and quiet. He's the best person I know. That part isn't... Most people hear disabled and they hear a tragedy. Ethan would hate that. He's funny, obnoxiously funny. What kind of humor? Terrible. Dad jokes, mostly, but he times them perfectly, so you always fall for it. A short laugh, quick and real, the kind that catches a person off guard. Last week he told me I needed to learn to delegate, and then said, or am I being too forward? And then immediately did this face. She stopped. You'd have to see the face. Sounds like a nightmare. He's the best, she said simply. He can't always... She let out a breath. Our mother is also not well. It's her memory. She has days that are better and days that are not, and on the not days she doesn't always know who I am. Logan was quiet. I'm telling you this, Victoria said, because I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't usually... Because you needed to tell someone, Logan said gently. And you trust that I won't do anything with it. Silence. Do I trust that? She asked. I think you do, or you wouldn't have said it. A long pause. Outside his window, the city was doing its nighttime thing. A siren somewhere, a late bus, the particular frequency of a city that never goes fully quiet. My mother used to take Ethan and me to Navy Pier in the summers, Victoria said. We'd do the Ferris wheel. She was afraid of heights, but she'd go every time because Ethan loved it. She'd hold his hand the whole way up and pretend she wasn't scared. A pause. She doesn't remember that now. Some days she doesn't remember his name. I'm sorry, Logan said, because there was nothing else to say, and he meant it. It's fine, she said automatically, then caught herself. It's not fine. I don't know why I keep saying that. Because you've been saying it for a long time. Yes, she said quietly. I have. They stayed on the phone for another hour. They didn't talk about marketing or clients or the industry. They talked about other things, his daughter's croissant opinions, a book they'd both apparently read last year and had different reactions to, the specific exhaustion of loving people whose pain you couldn't fix. Small things and large things mixed together the way they are in real conversations. Before she hung up, she said, Logan? First time she'd used his name. Not Pierce. Logan. Yeah, he said. Thank you for all of it. You don't have to thank me. I know, she said. I want to anyway. It was sad. He drove home that night thinking about the careful architecture of a person who had built their whole exterior around the idea that they didn't need anything from anyone, and how much work that was, and how heavy it must get when you're also carrying everything else. He thought about the way she'd laughed, that quick, surprised laugh, when she talked about her brother's timing. He thought about how a person who looked like absolute authority at a conference table could sit barefoot on a wet curb and press their forehead to their knees and make that small, escaping sound of something held in too long finally slipping loose. He thought, I am in a lot of trouble. He went home, checked on Maya, who was asleep with 3 stuffed animals arranged around her in a formation that seemed deliberate. Made himself a drink he didn't finish. Went to bed. Did not sleep for a while. Stared at the ceiling and listened to the city outside and told himself with the same hopeful optimism of the early night sleep he never got. This is manageable. He'd think about the rest later. Right now it was enough to know that somewhere across the city, a woman who had spent 3 years being his most formidable opponent had said his name like it was a choice and meant it. The thing about keeping a secret for someone was that it changed the way you saw them. Not all at once, not the dramatic, cinematic version where the music swells and suddenly everything is different. It happened gradually, like light changing in a room without anyone touching the switch. One morning, Logan would be reviewing a competitor analysis and come across Victoria's latest campaign and think that's a smart read on the demographic shift before he thought anything else. He'd catch himself mid-thought and feel vaguely off balance, the way you feel when you reach for a step that isn't there. He'd spent 3 years training himself to see her work as a problem to solve. Now he was looking at it differently, and he couldn't entirely decide whether that was a liability or not. What he knew for certain was this. He hadn't told anyone. Not Priya, who asked occasionally whether he'd heard anything about Kane Strategic's rumored new client. Not Davidson, who liked to keep informal tabs on the competition. Not even his friend Marcus's father, Ray, who he'd known since college and who had a long memory and no filter and would have found the whole thing fascinating in the worst possible way. He hadn't told anyone, and it hadn't been difficult. That surprised him a little. He'd expected it to feel like effort. Keeping something compartmentalized always did. But this was just quiet. He kept it the same way he kept other things that mattered, carefully, without making a production of it. Victoria, for her part, didn't mention it. The calls continued. They remained irregular and ostensibly professional at the start, though neither of them was particularly committed to the pretense anymore. She'd call about a vendor, and they'd end up talking for an hour. He'd text her an article he thought she'd find relevant, and she'd respond with 3 sentences of analysis, and then a 4th that had nothing to do with the article and everything to do with whatever she was actually thinking about. They were, he realized somewhere around week 5, doing a very careful dance around something neither of them was naming. He was fine with that. He had a daughter to raise and a career to run and enough complications already. He was absolutely fine with that. He was telling himself this on a Wednesday afternoon in November when his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria that read, "Ethan wants to know if you're a real person or if I made you up." Logan stared at it for a second. Then, "What did you tell him?" Her response came back almost immediately. "I said you were a work contact. Does he believe you?" "No," he said, and I quote, "Nobody calls a work contact at 11 p.m. to argue about a book." Logan smiled at his phone. He was in a meeting that had run long, and he probably shouldn't have been looking at his phone, but the meeting was mostly Davidson talking, and Davidson could sustain a monologue without audience participation for impressive lengths of time. He's not wrong. He's never wrong. It's his most annoying quality. "Tell him I'm real." A pause. Then, he says hi. "Also, he wants to know your opinion on dad jokes." Logan thought about it. They have to be delivered with complete sincerity. If you acknowledge that you know it's a bad joke, you've lost it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, he said, "This man understands. I'm leaving now before this gets worse." Logan put his phone away and looked up to find Davidson wrapping up what appeared to be his conclusion, which meant Logan had missed approximately none of the critical content. He nodded at the right moment, made a note on his pad that said, Ethan/11 p.m./book argument and then immediately crossed it out. He focused on the meeting. He was good at focusing. He'd built his whole career on it. It was fine. Bachin. The third week of November, he met Ethan Kane. It wasn't planned. Victoria had called on a Saturday morning. Unusual, she generally kept weekends professional only unless something was pressing. And her voice had a tight, controlled quality that he'd learned meant she was managing something. She said she was at a physical therapy appointment with Ethan, and the transportation she'd arranged for afterward had fallen through, and she had a 2 o'clock client call she could not miss. And was he, by any chance, anywhere near the north side? He was on his way to pick Maya up from a birthday party that didn't end until 1:30. He did the math. "Text me the address," he said. "You have your daughter. She's going to be at a party for another hour. Text me the address, Victoria." She texted him the address. He got there at 12:40, pulling into the parking lot of a rehabilitation center that was newer than he'd expected, well-funded looking, with wide accessible paths and a garden area visible from the entrance that still had a few hardy plants holding out against the November cold. He texted Victoria that he was outside, and she came out through the main doors about 4 minutes later, and beside her, slightly ahead of her actually, moving with the particular focused energy of someone who had long since stopped waiting for the world to adjust to his pace, was Ethan Kane. He was in a power wheelchair, built solid, not the kind that projected limitation, but the kind that projected "I have places to be." He had Victoria's coloring, dark hair, same sharp jaw, but where she ran cool and precise, he had this immediate open quality, like a person who had made a decision at some point to spend his energy on things other than guardedness. He was wearing a hoodie that said Northwestern across the chest, and he was looking at Logan with an expression of frank, unfiltered assessment. "You're taller than I pictured," Ethan said. "Ethan," Victoria said. "What?" "He is." He extended his hand to Logan with the easy confidence of someone who'd had a lot of practice making that gesture feel like exactly what it was, a greeting between equals. "Ethan Kane, my sister has told me almost nothing about you, which means you're important." Logan shook his hand. "Logan Pierce, she's told me you have excellent comedic timing." Ethan looked at Victoria. "I like him." "Don't encourage him," Victoria said. She was checking her watch, running a calculation, and Logan could see the conflict in it. The pull toward the 2 o'clock call, the pull toward staying. She looked at Logan. "I'll be back by 3:30 at the latest. His afternoon attendant doesn't come until 4, so if you could just—" "We're good," Logan said. "He needs—" "Victoria." He kept his voice level. "We're good. Go." She looked at him for a moment, then at Ethan, who made a small shooing gesture with one hand that was so completely dry and so perfectly timed that Logan almost laughed. She looked like she wanted to say 6 more things. She said none of them, turned, and walked to her car. Logan watched her go. Then he looked at Ethan. "So," he said. "Lunch?" Ethan considered. "There's a place 2 blocks that does incredible banh mi. You good with walking?" "I'm good with walking." "Cool. I'm going to tell you everything embarrassing about my sister, and there's nothing she can do about it." Logan fell into step, into pace, adjusting naturally, beside the chair. "I'm listening." "That's what I thought," Ethan said, and started talking. They were at the sandwich place for an hour and 40 minutes. Logan ordered 2 drinks, and Ethan ordered something complicated, and they ate and talked. And Logan found out that Victoria had been working since she was 16, first a part-time job at a print shop, then freelance design work, then the slow construction of what was now a real company. That she'd turned down a scholarship to an MBA program when the accident happened because Ethan's care costs and their mother's expenses meant she needed income, not education. That she'd never told anyone in the industry that because she'd decided people would see it as a reason to underestimate her. That she cried exactly once after the accident in a hospital parking garage, and then did not cry again for almost 2 years. That she called Ethan every single day and had not missed a day in 4 years. "She thinks she has to hold everything," Ethan said. He was looking at his cup, turning it slowly. "She's been doing it so long she doesn't even notice it's heavy anymore. That's the part that worries me." "Does she have anyone?" Logan asked. "Outside of work, friends who—" "She has people she knows," Ethan said carefully. colleagues, professional relationships, friendly ones. He looked up, but someone who just sees her, for the actual person under all the... No. He paused. Not until recently, apparently. Logan didn't look away. I'm her competitor. I know. We've spent 3 years trying to outmaneuver each other. I know that too. Ethan looked at him with that open, direct quality that was impossible to deflect. Does that feel like what's happening now? Logan was quiet. She's not easy, Ethan said. She doesn't ask for things. She doesn't let people in without running about 40 background checks first. She's going to push back on everything because she's been burned before and she doesn't like not being in control of outcomes. He paused. But she called you on a Saturday morning when she needed help, and she doesn't do that, so. Logan looked out the window at the street. A couple walking past with a dog. A kid on a scooter, the helmet slightly crooked. An ordinary Saturday in Chicago, everything going about its business. I'll figure it out, he said finally. It wasn't a promise to Ethan. It was more like something he was saying out loud to hear how it sounded. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said. I figured. When Victoria got back at 3:15, they were still at the table. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the two of them, then at the empty plates, then at Ethan's expression, which was the picture of innocence. What did you tell him? She said. Nothing, Ethan said. Ethan. Just some highlights, the print shop thing, Ethan. Time you cried at that Pixar movie and told me it was allergies. I'm going to need you to stop talking, Victoria said, and she was trying not to smile. Logan could see it, the effort she was putting into maintaining the expression. He already knew the important stuff, Ethan said simply. Victoria looked at Logan. He looked back at her. He didn't say anything because he didn't need to. She shook her head very slightly. Not disagreement, just acknowledgement, and sat down and stole Ethan's remaining chips without asking. And Ethan said, hey, without conviction, and the three of them stayed another 20 minutes. Logan drove home thinking about the print shop, thinking about a 26-year-old turning down a scholarship, thinking about daily phone calls, 4 years unbroken. He thought, I had her completely wrong, not wrong about her capabilities. He'd never been wrong about those, wrong about what was underneath. He picked Maya up from Mrs. Patterson's at 5. She immediately began debriefing him on the birthday party with the comprehensiveness of a congressional report, and he listened to every word, genuinely, because Maya's detailed analysis of social dynamics was one of his favorite things, and because he needed the ballast of it, the warm, specific realness of his daughter's life, to settle himself back into his own. But December moved fast, the way December always did in Chicago. Cold arriving fully committed, no courtesy period, the wind off the lake making the streets feel like the city had something personal against you. Logan spent most of it in the productive, focused tunnel of a Q4 push, the way serious people in marketing always spent December. Pitches, closings, the scramble of clients wanting campaigns locked in before the year ended. He and Victoria continued their calls. They were openly undefinable now, which both of them seemed to have agreed to without discussing. Not a friendship exactly, not a professional relationship exactly, something that sat in the space between those categories and declined to be categorized. She was easier than he'd expected in some ways. Not easy. Ethan had been right about that. She pushed back on everything. She kept testing the boundaries of conversations like she was checking whether they'd hold her weight. But there was a directness to her that he found, against all expectation, restful. She didn't perform. She said what she thought, or she didn't say anything, and she'd gotten efficient at identifying which category a given thing fell into. With Logan, increasingly, she said what she thought. He did the same. He hadn't realized until now how rarely he did that. Can I ask you something? She said one evening in mid-December. They were on the phone and it was past 9 and Logan was washing dishes, the phone wedged against his shoulder in the way that was terrible for his neck, and that he did anyway. You're going to ask it regardless, he said. Fair. A pause. Maya's mother, what happened there? He was quiet for a moment, not because the question landed hard. It had been 4 years and he'd made his peace with most of it, but because he was deciding how much to give her. He thought about what Ethan had said. She's been burned before, and she doesn't like not being in control of outcomes. Victoria giving him something real always cost her something. He could give her something real back. She left, he said simply. Not for someone else. Nothing that clean. She just... He thought about how to say it. She'd wanted a different life than the one we built. I think she knew that before Maya, and she thought she could want her way into a different feeling, and it didn't work. And to her credit, she was honest about it when she finally admitted it. But by then, Maya was 3. I'm sorry, Victoria said. We're okay now. Maya and me. He meant it. It was bad for a while. That first year was... He stopped. It was a lot. But she's the best thing I've ever done, and her mother is doing better, and they have a real relationship now, which is what matters. Do you... Victoria started and stopped. No, he said, knowing the question. I don't still have feelings for her. Haven't for a while. That was more about grief than love, I think. What I missed was the idea of the shape of things. The shape of things, she repeated quietly, like she was turning it over. The family, the picture of a life I'd been building toward. When that went away, I had to build a different picture. He put a dish in the rack. It took longer than I wanted it to, but it's a good picture now. Silence for a moment. I haven't built a picture, Victoria said. I mean, I have plans, revenue targets, expansion strategy, Ethan's care plan through next year, my mother's... She stopped. But an actual life picture. What that looks like for me personally. A short breath. I think I stopped doing that a long time ago. It started to seem like a luxury. It's not a luxury. Some things are only not luxuries if you have the... Victoria. He said her name the way she said his, as a choice. It's not a luxury. She didn't argue. He took that as a small victory. When did you figure out what your picture looked like? She asked. He thought about it. Sitting in Maya's room in the middle of the night when she was about 3.5. She was asleep and I was just on the floor next to her bed because I needed to be near something that was still okay. He paused. I thought, this is the center. Everything else gets built around this. He heard Victoria exhale slowly. Not quite a sigh. More like something settling. I don't have a center like that, she said. I know. Ethan would say he's my center. He'd be right, to a point, but you can't build a whole life around protecting one person. That's not the same as having a life. Another silence. He was getting better at her silences. The ones that meant she was processing. The ones that meant she was deciding whether to trust something. The ones that meant she was working very hard not to feel whatever she was feeling. This one was the second kind. I should let you go, she said finally. Okay. Logan? Yeah. I'm glad I called you that night. Quiet, direct, no performance. On the phone in December, when I wanted to close the loop, he stood in his kitchen with the dish rack half full and the window showing Chicago nighttime and his chest doing something complicated. Me too, he said. Okay, she said. Then, good night. Good night, Victoria. She hung up. He stood there for a moment, then finished the dishes. Went and checked on Maya, who was asleep with the stuffed animals in their deliberate formation. Stood in her doorway for a minute. He thought, the center holds. He went to bed. Slept better than he had in a while. January brought the kind of cold that made Chicago feel personal, and it also brought Richard Calloway. Calloway was a senior executive at Mercer and Loft. Not Logan's direct supervisor, but adjacent, the kind of person who had enough authority to make things difficult and enough ambition to find it worthwhile. He was 51, polished in the way that required maintenance, and he'd been at the company 14 years, which was long enough to have built a complex infrastructure of alliances and dependencies that functioned, Logan had always thought, more like a protection racket than a collegial environment. Logan had known, in the vague way you know about weather systems, that Calloway had a position on Victoria Kane. The position was competitive in the way that went beyond normal industry rivalry. It was the specific, sharper thing that happened when someone younger and better was succeeding in the same space you occupied. Victoria's company had taken 2 accounts from firms in Calloway's network in the past 18 months, and Calloway had said things in meetings that were pitched as analysis but functioned as grievance. In January, Calloway started saying things about Victoria to people who mattered. Logan found out about it from Priya, who had ears everywhere and the discretion to deploy information carefully. She came to his office on a Tuesday and shut the door, which she only did when she was telling him something she didn't want overheard. Calloway is building a narrative, she said, leaning against the door, about Kane's strategic. He's been in meetings with Davidson and two of the partners talking about financial instability. He's got something, numbers, I think, or something that looks like numbers, and he's been presenting it as due diligence, like he's doing the company a service by flagging a potential risk in a firm we've worked with. Logan kept his face neutral. What's he saying specifically? That her overhead is unsustainable, that she's overextended, that the company looks healthy from outside, but the internal structure is. Priya made a gesture that meant and so on. He's being careful about it, just concerned, just professional caution, nothing that could be called an attack. But it's being heard. Davidson asked me yesterday whether I'd noticed anything in our interactions with Kane's strategic that seemed off. She looked at him steadily. I said no, because I haven't. But the seed is planted. Logan sat with that. Where's he getting the numbers? That I don't know. Is any of it accurate? Priya gave him a look. I have no idea what her actual internal financials look like, Logan. Neither does he. Which means whatever he's presenting is either guesswork, extrapolation, or something he obtained in a way I'd rather not think about. After she left, Logan sat in his office for a long time. He thought about Calloway's particular brand of calculated patient malice, the kind that never left fingerprints because it operated entirely through implication and strategically timed concern. He thought about what that kind of campaign could do to a company the size of Victoria's, where reputation was infrastructure, where one wrong whisper in the right room could shift how clients thought about risk. He thought about whether to tell her. He picked up his phone and put it down 3 times. He wasn't sure what he was protecting, her peace of mind or the thing between them that was still fragile and new. Telling her meant pulling her into something stressful she couldn't currently see, which felt like it should be her choice. Not telling her felt like a different kind of failure. He told her. He kept it short and factual when he called that evening, laying out what Priya had told him without editorializing, and Victoria listened without interrupting, and when he finished, there was a silence that had a different quality from her usual ones, sharper, more awake. How long has this been going on? She said. Not a question, a diagnosis. Priya thinks at least 3 weeks. Davidson. She said the name flatly. He was at the Langford dinner last month. He was friendlier than usual, and I put it down to the wine. A short, humorless sound. I should have flagged it. You couldn't have known. I should have. She stopped herself, refocused. Calloway. I know who he is. I've been aware of him peripherally. A pause. He shouldn't have anything real. Our financials are clean and our overhead is managed. If he has numbers, he built them. I know. I need to think about this. Her voice was shifting into the mode he'd started to recognize. Not cold exactly, but operational. The part of her that ran the company. I can't react directly without escalating it in ways that make me look defensive. I need to document, Logan said. Everything you have that contradicts the narrative. Revenue records, client renewals, anything that demonstrates stability. Not for a confrontation, just so you're not caught flat if it escalates. I know how to handle a professional threat, Logan. I know you do. He paused. I'm not trying to manage you. I'm thinking out loud. A beat. Keep thinking out loud, she said, slightly differently. They spent 40 minutes on it, the two of them working through scenarios and responses the way they worked through industry problems. Efficiently, with the easy shorthand of people whose thinking complemented each other in ways that still surprised Logan when he noticed it. She asked sharp questions and pushed back on 3 of his suggestions and improved on 2 of them, and by the end had the outline of an approach. Thank you, she said, for telling me. You'd do the same. Silence. Then quietly, I would. Yeah. That felt like something new. He didn't name it. The months had a rhythm now that Logan hadn't designed but had stopped pretending he didn't rely on. Calls that weren't just calls. Texts that answered the question the previous text had really been asking. 3 lunches in January and February, ostensibly to discuss a vendor they were both evaluating, which neither of them mentioned after the first 10 minutes. One afternoon in February, when Ethan had a setback, a secondary complication that landed him back in the hospital for 4 days, and Logan drove Victoria there and sat in the hospital waiting room for 2 hours without being asked, reading a 3-year-old Sports Illustrated and buying terrible machine coffee and not saying anything particularly profound, just being there. And Victoria came out eventually and sat beside him and put her head back against the wall and said, "He's going to be fine." And he said, "I know," and they sat like that for a while. She looked at him sideways at one point and said, "You're going to be late for your 3 o'clock. I already rescheduled it." She looked at the ceiling. "You didn't have to do that." "Okay." "Logan, I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." He looked at her profile, the tension in her jaw, the careful way she was holding herself together. "Let me be here without making it a discussion." A pause. "Okay," she said quietly. He brought her a coffee from the machine even though it was terrible, and she drank it without complaining, which he noted because Victoria Kane did not silently tolerate bad coffee under normal circumstances. He was in trouble, he knew. He'd known it for a while. The knowing had just been living in him without creating urgency, because some part of him had decided they'd get to it eventually, or they wouldn't. And either way, the thing between them was worth having in whatever form it took. But sitting in that waiting room with her, watching her breathe through something she couldn't control, he had a clear, uncomplicated thought that cut right through all of his careful equanimity. I don't want to do this wrong. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, he wanted to not do it wrong. In March, Maya met Victoria. Also not planned. Logan had brought Maya into the office on a half day, as he occasionally did when school scheduling conflicted with Mrs. Patterson's availability. Maya had a complete working theory of what offices were. She called them the serious buildings, and had opinions about whether they were fun or not fun based on criteria she hadn't fully articulated. Mercer and Loft was, she'd ruled, medium fun, mostly because of the snacks in the break room and the existence of Priya, who took Maya's opinion seriously and argued back, which Maya found deeply satisfying. Victoria had come by the office on the pretense of dropping off documentation related to the vendor evaluation they still hadn't technically closed the books on. She and Logan had been in the hallway for approximately 4 minutes before Maya came barreling out of the break room with a granola bar and stopped dead at the sight of an unfamiliar person. Maya Pierce could assess adults in about 6 seconds. Logan had watched her do it her whole life, that rapid, quiet recalibration that happened behind her eyes while her face did something neutral. With most adults she liked, she became immediately chatty. With adults she was unsure of, she went watchful. With Victoria Kane, she went watchful. Victoria looked down at her, and Logan watched something happen that he hadn't seen before, which was Victoria Kane confronted with a small person who was looking at her with absolutely zero professional deference and not knowing exactly what to do about it. She held it well. But there was a half second of real uncertainty there. "Hi," Victoria said. "Hi," Maya said. Then, "Are you my dad's work friend or his work enemy?" Logan closed his eyes briefly. Victoria glanced at him, back to Maya. "Complicated question." "It's not that complicated," Maya said. "Daddy says some people at work are friends and some are enemies and some are—" She squinted. "He called them something." "Frenemies," Logan said, resigned. "Yeah, frenemies." "Which one are you?" Victoria considered this with apparent seriousness. "I think your dad and I are figuring that out." Maya seemed to find this an acceptable answer, which was more than Logan had expected. "Okay, I'm Maya. I'm 7. "I know. Your dad talks about you." Maya looked at Logan with mild accusation. "What do you say about me?" "Good things," he said. "Like what?" "Like you have strong opinions about croissants." Maya turned back to Victoria. "Do you like croissants?" "When they're made correctly," Victoria said. And Maya Pierce, 7 years old, the most reliable judge of character Logan had ever known, smiled. Small, considering, but real. "Yeah," she said. "Exactly." Logan stood in the hallway and watched the two most important people in his current life discuss the acceptable number of pastry layers with complete mutual seriousness, and felt something in his chest that was probably a lot of different things at once, and thought, okay, all right, this is the shape of it. Later, after Victoria had gone and Maya was in the back seat of the car, she said, I like her. Yeah? She talks to me like I'm a person, not like I'm little. She's good at that. Maya was quiet for a moment. Is she your girlfriend? No, Logan said, but you like her. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Maya was looking out the window with the patient, knowing expression of a child who has already arrived at the answer and is only asking to see if the adult will be honest. Yeah, he said, I like her. Okay, Maya said, and went back to looking at the window. Logan drove. The city moved past them. He thought about the shape of things. He thought, I'm going to have to tell her. Not yet. Things between him and Victoria were still tender in certain places, still finding their structure. Calloway's campaign was ongoing and taking Victoria's focus, and Ethan's recovery from February was still demanding her attention, and their professional lives were entering the most intense quarter of the year. There were about 15 reasons this wasn't the moment. But he thought about it. He let himself think about it without managing the thought back down into something smaller and safer. He thought, eventually. Maya fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes from home, which she never admitted to doing, always insisting when she woke up that she'd only been resting her eyes. Logan drove through the darkening city and let himself, quietly and without drama, want what he wanted. The rivalry wasn't over. The competition would continue. It had to. It was the shape of their work. But the shape of everything else was changing, had been changing since a rainy night in October, and he was done pretending he didn't know where it was going. He was terrified, honestly. He wasn't good at this, and he'd been hurt before, and she was Victoria Kane, which came with its own specific category of complication. But he wasn't built for small, neither was she. That had always been the problem with them, and maybe also, he thought, accelerating through a yellow light on Lakeshore Drive with his daughter asleep behind him and the lake showing dark and vast to his left. Maybe it was also the answer. The Calloway situation didn't explode. It eroded. That was the thing about the kind of campaign Calloway was running. It wasn't designed to land a single decisive blow. It was designed to accumulate. Each conversation he had, each casually expressed concern, each strategically placed doubt, added a thin layer of sediment to the way people thought about Victoria Kane's company. Nothing you could point to directly, nothing that looked like an attack when examined in isolation, just a slow, quiet reframing of how her name sounded in certain rooms. Logan watched it happen over March and into April with the specific frustration of knowing what was occurring and being able to do very little about it directly. He fed information to Priya, who was careful and well-placed, and understood the architecture of influence without needing it explained. He paid attention in meetings. He noted who repeated Calloway's framing and who didn't, and filed that information away. He didn't tell Victoria everything. Not because he was protecting her. She'd made it abundantly clear she had no interest in being protected from information relevant to her professional life. He didn't tell her everything because some of it wasn't confirmed enough to be useful, and giving her half-formed intelligence would only cost her energy she was already spending in multiple directions at once. He told her what was actionable. He held the rest. It wasn't comfortable. He wasn't sure it was the right call, but it was the call he made. In April, Ethan started a new outpatient program that had a better weekly schedule for him, which meant Victoria's transportation logistics shifted, which meant she had 3 afternoons a week with something approaching breathing room built into them. She used this breathing room, as far as Logan could tell, to work more. He called her on a Tuesday at 5:15, and she was still at the office. You have approximately 45 minutes of free time built into your Tuesday now, he said. I know. You're at the office. I have a proposal to finish. Victoria. Logan, Go home, he said. Or go somewhere that isn't the office. The proposal will be there at 7 a.m. A pause. You're not I'm someone who has been watching you run at this pace for 6 months, and I'm telling you it's going to catch up with you. He kept his voice even. Take 45 minutes. A long silence. I don't know what I do with 45 minutes, she said, and the honesty in it was so unguarded that he went quiet for a moment. Go for a walk, he said. Sit somewhere and watch people. Eat something bad for you. I'm fine. There's that word again. Another pause. I don't know how to turn it off, she said, quietly, like she hadn't meant to say it that clearly. The running, I don't know how to just stop. I know. Every time I slow down, I think about what's not getting done. I know that too. How do you... She stopped. You have Maya. You have a reason to stop at the end of the day. Something that requires your presence in a specific place at a specific time. I don't have that. You have Ethan. Ethan has good days now. He doesn't need me there every evening. A breath. That's good. That's what I worked for. But it means I don't have anything that... She trailed off again. Logan thought about the hospital waiting room in February, about the way she'd held her head back against the wall, exhausted enough to drop some of the architecture for a few minutes, about the terrible machine coffee she'd drunk without complaining. Come have dinner, he said. Silence. Me and Maya, he added. Nothing elaborate. She's been asking about you since March, which she'd deny if you brought it up, but she has. She has not. She asked me yesterday if the croissant lady was coming over soon. He heard something shift, the catch of a surprised, almost laugh. She didn't call me that. She absolutely did. She has a naming convention. You've made the list. Another pause, a different quality from the earlier ones, not the processing kind or the deciding kind, something lighter. I'll come for an hour, Victoria said. She stayed for 3. The dinner was spaghetti because Maya had requested it, and the spaghetti was unremarkable. Logan was a competent cook in the way of a person who had learned to cook out of necessity rather than interest. And Maya talked for approximately 80% of the meal about a school project involving the solar system that she felt was being undermined by Marcus's insistence that Pluto should count. It doesn't count, Maya said, pointing her fork. It's a dwarf planet. There are rules. Some people find the rules unfair, Victoria said. She was eating with the careful manners she probably had everywhere, and also, Logan noticed, the relaxed posture of someone who had, in fact, turned it off, marginally, for the moment. Rules aren't about fair, Maya said. Rules are about what's true. That's a very sophisticated position for a second grader. Maya looked at her. What grade do you have to be for it to not be sophisticated? Victoria blinked, then looked at Logan. She does that. Every day, he confirmed. I'm right there, Maya said. After dinner, Maya did her homework at the kitchen table with what she described as company supervision, which meant Logan and Victoria sat nearby while she worked and could be consulted about specific facts, but were not to interfere with the process. Victoria was consulted once about the distance from Earth to Mars, and provided the information with such precision that Maya wrote it down without verifying it, which was the highest form of trust Maya offered a new person. When Maya went to bed, a production that involved 2 glasses of water, a discussion about whether dreams were real, and a final appeal about screen time that Logan declined, he came back to the kitchen, and Victoria was standing at the counter with her second glass of wine, looking at the photos on the refrigerator. Maya's school picture from September. A drawing Maya had made of the 2 of them at Navy Pier last summer, their proportions wildly off, but somehow deeply accurate in spirit. A photograph of Logan and his father from a fishing trip 15 years ago, edges slightly worn. She's going to be extraordinary, Victoria said. She already is. He leaned against the opposite counter. You okay? She stopped herself before Fine made it out. He watched her decide to be honest instead. I'm better than I was at 5 o'clock. Thank you for that. Any time. She looked at him. The kitchen light was the soft, warm kind that Maya had insisted on when they moved in, because she'd said the bright white light made the kitchen feel like a doctor's office. In that light, without the industry event armor or the operational mode she ran in during their difficult conversations, Victoria Kane looked like exactly who she was. Exhausted and brilliant and holding more than one person could comfortably hold, but here and present, and marginally softer than usual. I don't know what we're doing, she said. Direct. The way she always went direct when something mattered. Neither do I. That doesn't bother you? A little, he said honestly, but I figured out I'd rather be here not knowing than somewhere else being certain. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away. I'm not good at this, she said. Whatever this is, I'm not built for it. I know how to run a company. I know how to structure a deal. I know how to handle a professional crisis, but she made a gesture that took in the kitchen, the photographs, the general territory of this. I don't have a playbook for this. Neither do I, he said again. I have a 7-year-old and a destroyed tie and a Volvo that smells like strawberry chapstick. That's the whole playbook. She laughed. Not the small surprised one, a real one, and it changed her face entirely. He'd been collecting those laughs quietly for months without meaning to. Logan, she said. Yeah. I'm scared of it, she said. Just that. No elaboration. But the honesty of it landed the way real honesty lands. That not dramatic, just solid, like something true occupying space in the room. Me too, he said. They stood in the kitchen with that between them, and neither of them did anything about it, and that was fine, because some things needed to sit before they could move, and he'd learned by now that with Victoria, patience wasn't passive. It was the most active thing he could offer. She left at 10:15. He walked her to the door. She put her coat on and then paused, and the pause had a particular shape that he waited through, and then she reached out and put her hand briefly against his jaw. Not a kiss, not a lean-in, just her hand on his face for 3 or 4 seconds, looking at him. And then she dropped it and said goodnight and left. He stood in the doorway watching her walk to her car and thought, okay, all right, thought, we're going to get there. Then he went inside and did the dishes and was, for the first time in longer than he could easily remember, completely fine. Actually fine, not Victoria's version, with not knowing exactly what came next. April moved into May, and May was when things stopped eroding quietly and started to break. The meeting was a Thursday. Monthly strategy review, all senior staff, the conference room on the 14th floor, with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the river that nobody had time to look at because these meetings ran long and moved fast. Logan was there because his Q2 campaign projections were on the agenda. Callaway was there because Callaway was always in these rooms, positioned just far enough from the center to look objective. The first hour was standard. Davidson ran the agenda efficiently. Projections, personnel updates, a new partnership under discussion, some Q1 postmortem that most people had already processed. Logan presented his Q2 numbers, answered questions, sat back down. Then Callaway raised the matter of Kane strategic. He framed it as a resource question. The company was currently in a partnership arrangement with Kane Strategic on a joint initiative, a mid-size urban development client they'd brought in together, with Kane Strategic handling the brand strategy component. It was going well, by Logan's estimation. The work was good. Callaway said he was concerned. He pulled up a series of figures, presented on a clean slide, professional and sourced-looking, that purported to show irregularities in Kane Strategic's billing practices on the shared account, overcharges on labor hours, discrepancies between the work logged and the deliverables received. Not large enough to call outright fraud, but, Callaway said, with the measured gravity of someone performing reluctant duty, significant enough that he felt obligated to flag it before it became a problem. The room took it in. Logan watched faces around the table, the ones that already carried Callaway's narrative, and were nodding with the confirmation of something suspected, and the ones that were hearing this fresh and deciding how to receive it. He sat very still. He knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the figures were manufactured. He'd been close enough to the Kane strategic work on this account to know what was delivered and when. He knew the billing had been clean because he'd reviewed the joint documentation himself. Whatever numbers Callaway was presenting on that slide, they hadn't come from the actual records. He also knew that saying so right now, in this room, was going to cost him something. Callaway was a senior executive, 14 years at this company. The implication of Logan standing up and directly contradicting him, providing counter evidence, calling the figures into question, wouldn't read as Logan doing the right thing. It would read as Logan protecting a competitor, which would generate questions about why he was doing that, which would put a light on something he wasn't ready to have a light on, which would complicate things for Victoria in ways he couldn't predict. The easier thing, the professionally safer thing, was to say nothing. Let it be investigated. The truth would come out eventually, these things usually did, and Calloway was walking close enough to the edge that someone would eventually look at his methods more carefully. That was the rational calculation. Logan thought about a woman who had turned down a scholarship at 26. He thought about daily calls made for 4 years without missing one. He thought about a hand pressed against a silk blouse in the rain, and a cut that needed 4 stitches, and the specific exhausted weight of "because I'm Victoria Kane." He thought about what it would mean for her reputation if this sat in these men's minds for weeks or months without a direct challenge. Reputation wasn't rebuilt easily. Calloway knew that. That was the whole point. Logan put his hand up. Davidson looked at him. "Pierce, I want to address the figures Richard just presented," Logan said. He kept his voice level, not confrontational, factual. The tone of someone who had information and was offering it, not swinging at anyone. "I've been involved in the coordination with Kane Strategic on the Alderton account since it began. I've reviewed the joint documentation, including the billing records, on 2 separate occasions." He pulled out his phone, opened his email, found the document thread he'd kept. "The figures Richard is presenting don't match the records I have access to. I'd like to understand where his numbers came from before we draw any conclusions." The room had the particular quality of air going out of it. Calloway looked at him. The look was measured and entirely without surprise, which told Logan that Calloway had run some version of this scenario and had a response ready. "The figures were compiled from an independent review of the account documentation," he said smoothly. "I understand you've been working closely with Kane Strategic on this initiative, Logan, but that proximity might make it difficult to be fully objective about what the numbers show." There it was, clean and almost admirable in its efficiency. "You're too close to be credible." "I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it," Logan said. "I'm asking that before any formal action is taken, we do a direct comparison of the billing records Richard is working from and the joint account documentation that both companies have access to. If the records match his figures, we address it. If they don't match..." He let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. "Then we have a different question." Silence. Davidson looked between the two of them. He was a measured man, Davidson, not easily pushed in either direction, which was his greatest strength and occasionally his greatest limitation. He drummed his fingers once on the table. "That's a reasonable request," he said. "Richard, can you provide the source documentation for your review?" A beat. Tiny, but Logan caught it. The first crack in the performance. "It can be provided," Calloway said. "Good. I'd like it by end of week." Davidson moved on. The meeting continued. Logan sat in his seat and felt the specific, unsteady aftermath of having done something that couldn't be undone. Not with regret exactly, but with full awareness that the consequences were now in motion and he'd have to manage whatever they generated. Calloway didn't look at him for the rest of the meeting. Odds. Logan called Victoria from the parking garage. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting the call, which meant one of her sources in the building had already reached her. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable." He got in his car. He presented falsified billing discrepancies to Davidson and the partners. "I challenged it in the meeting. Davidson is requiring him to source the documentation by Friday." Silence. "You challenged it," she said, directly. "In the meeting." "Yes." "Logan." She stopped. He could hear her processing the full weight of what that meant. "You didn't have to..." "I know. Your position at that company is fine. I was factual, and I have documentation." He paused. "I was careful. You put yourself between him and me." "I put the truth between him and a bad decision by your mutual business partners," he corrected. "That's different." "It's not that different." He didn't argue. "How are you?" "How am I?" A short, disbelieving breath. You just told me a senior executive at your firm fabricated financial misconduct against my company and then challenged him in front of his partners, and you're asking how I am? Yes. I'm. She stopped. Started again. I'm angry. I'm angry in a way that I have to be careful about because if I let myself feel all of it right now, I'm going to do something that doesn't serve me. A pause. And I'm. Another stop. Say it, Logan said. I don't know what to do with you, she said finally. Her voice was quieter now, the anger settling under something else. I've been figuring out how to not need anyone for a very long time, and then you just... She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You make it very difficult to maintain that as a strategy. He sat in the parking garage in the dark and felt that land exactly where it was aimed. Good, he said. A long pause. The documentation he produces on Friday, she said, shifting back into operational mode, but differently. With him now, not alone in it. If it doesn't match the actual records, we need to be ready to move quickly. My attorney can... Already sent him an email. You contacted your attorney? My attorney's name is Derek, and he's been my neighbor for 6 years, and I texted him from the meeting because I knew we'd need him ready. He says hi. Silence. Then, you texted your attorney from the meeting. I'm good at keeping a straight face. The silence shifted into something that had warmth in it. I've noticed, she said. Pause. The week leading to Friday was the kind of week that had too many moving parts. Calloway's documentation came in Thursday evening. Logan wasn't surprised he moved early. It was the kind of play you made when you wanted to control the timing. And it was, as he'd expected, carefully assembled nonsense. The figures were real numbers from real documents, but they'd been taken out of context, combined in ways that created a false picture, and attributed to a review methodology that didn't hold up to scrutiny. Derek looked at it Thursday night and said, in the language of someone who'd spent 20 years in corporate litigation, "This is embarrassing. Whoever built this thought they were being clever." He's been at it since January, Logan said. Long runway for a sloppy landing. Derek leaned back in his chair. This isn't fraud. It's not precise enough to be fraud. It's closer to negligent misrepresentation, but paired with a pattern of conduct. He looked up. How documented is the pattern? Logan opened his laptop. Priya has been keeping a record since February. Dates, attendees, approximate content of Calloway's conversations with Davidson and 2 of the partners. Secondhand, but detailed. Derek was quiet for a moment. You've been building this for a while. I didn't know how far he'd take it. Well, Derek closed the folder. You took him seriously enough. That's what matters now. The Friday meeting was smaller. Davidson, 2 partners, Logan, Calloway, and the head of the legal team. Calloway came in with the same controlled posture he always carried, which Logan had to give him credit for. Whatever he was feeling, he'd spent 14 years learning to not show it in rooms like this. Logan came in with Derek's analysis, Priya's documentation, and 6 months of patience. The meeting lasted an hour and 20 minutes. Logan walked Davidson through the comparison between Calloway's figures and the actual account records line by line, with the calm, methodical delivery of someone who wasn't performing confidence because he didn't need to. The discrepancies were clear. The documentation Calloway had provided to build his figures was identified, contextualized, and shown to be misapplied. Priya's record of the conversations was presented as a pattern of conduct. Calloway tried 3 different approaches. The first was technical, challenging the validity of Logan's source documents. This failed because Logan had the original joint account files time-stamped and accessible. The second was personal, returning to the proximity argument, the implication of bias. Davidson shut this down with a brevity that suggested he'd been thinking about it since the previous meeting. The third was vague, suggesting that even if the specific figures were imperfect, the underlying concern about Kane's strategic practices remained valid and deserved review. Based on what evidence? Davidson asked. His voice was even, but something in it had closed. Calloway had nothing new. The meeting ended without resolution. No formal action against anyone, which Logan had expected. These things didn't resolve in a single room. But the dynamic had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Calloway's narrative had been interrupted. The documentation was now on record. The pattern was visible. Walking out, Calloway fell into step beside Logan for approximately 4 seconds. He didn't say anything, but his jaw was set in a way that was a message, and Logan received it clearly. This isn't done. Logan looked at him once, kept walking. Down. He told Victoria everything that evening on the phone, and she listened without interrupting for the longest stretch of uninterrupted listening he'd ever gotten from her. When he finished, there was a pause. "Are you okay?" she said. He hadn't expected that to be the first thing. He sat with it for a second. "Yes." "He's going to come at you now. You know that." "I know." "Logan." "Victoria, I know." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm telling you what happened so you're not blindsided by anything that comes next." "You shouldn't have—" "Don't," he said. "Don't do that. Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't have done." Silence. "He was going to damage your company," Logan said. "Over time, quietly, with nothing you could challenge directly. I had the ability to challenge it, so I did." He paused. That's what you do." "Not everyone," she said quietly. "Well," he didn't have anything to add to that. A long pause. "I don't know how to—" She stopped. "I want to say thank you, but it doesn't feel like enough." "It's enough." "It's not—" "Victoria." He said her name the way he always did when she was spinning. She stopped. "It's enough. Let it be enough." A longer silence. He waited. "Okay," she said finally, small and real. "Okay." May was also when the Hartwell Group came into the picture. The Hartwell Group was a real estate development and urban infrastructure company that had been looking for a marketing partner for their largest project in 20 years, the Lakeside Commons development, a mixed-use complex on the South Lakefront that was going to be high-profile enough to define whoever handled it. The budget was significant. The visibility was higher. Every serious marketing firm in Chicago was aware of it. Victoria had been in early conversations with them since March. Logan found this out in the normal course of industry awareness, the same way he tracked all her significant movements. He was also aware that Mercer and Loft was not in those conversations, because the lead had gone to a firm with closer ties to the development world. What he didn't expect was the call he got in the 3rd week of May from Victoria herself. "I want to bring you in on Hartwell," she said. He sat up. "Explain." "They want more than a brand campaign. They want a full integrated strategy, digital, experiential, community relations, political positioning. My team is strong on the brand side. Your team is better than mine on the integrated strategy architecture." She said it without hesitation, which told him she'd already wrestled with the admission and decided it was just true. "I want to bring you in as a strategic partner on the Hartwell pitch. Joint presentation, revenue split to be negotiated, but I'm thinking 60-40, my company leads." 60-40. "We're leading the relationship. You want my best strategic work for 40%. I want a partner who can strengthen the pitch. If you think 40 is wrong, make a case." He thought about it. The Hartwell account was the kind of thing that defined a career trajectory. If they won it, it would be the largest project either company had ever run. And she was right. His team's integrated strategy capability was the thing that would make the difference in a pitch at this scale. 55-45, he said. "You lead the relationship, I lead the strategy architecture." A pause. "Fine." "Fine?" "Don't push it." He smiled at his desk. "When's the pitch?" "June 18th. We have 3 weeks." "Send me what you have." She sent the files that night, a folder that was organized the way Victoria organized everything, which was comprehensively and with labels that assumed you would read them in order, which Logan did. By 11 p.m., he'd been through the whole thing and sent her a voice memo with his initial read, which was that the brand positioning was strong, but the community relations strategy needed a complete rethink if they were going to navigate the political landscape of the lakefront development without running into organized opposition. She called back 9 minutes later. "Walk me through the community relations piece." "It's 11 p.m. "I'm aware." "Walk me through it." He walked her through it. She pushed back on the timeline. He revised it. She raised a stakeholder mapping issue he hadn't considered. He incorporated it. They worked for 2 hours, building something neither of them could have built alone. And Logan sat at his desk in the late quiet of a Thursday night, thinking about how the best work he'd done in 3 years had come out of this, out of her, and how long he'd spent thinking of her as an obstacle. They were not, he thought, going to be rivals for much longer. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. He knew how he felt about everything else. "This is going to be good," she said, somewhere around 1 a.m. Her voice had the particular texture of someone who'd been working hard and felt it in the good way. "Yeah," he said. "It is." A pause. "Logan?" "Still here." "After Hartwell," she said, and then stopped. "After Hartwell," he said. Neither of them finished the sentence, but it sat between them on the line. Not a question, not a promise. Something closer to a direction. "Get some sleep," she said. "You too." He put down the phone and sat in the quiet of his apartment and thought about June 18th and everything that would have to go right, and some things that might go wrong, and the specific, slightly terrifying feeling of having tied his professional ambitions to the same person he'd tied his whatever it was. The other thing, Maya was asleep down the hall. The city outside was doing its nighttime frequency. The Hartwell files were open on his screen. He saved the working document, closed his laptop, went to bed. He dreamed about the pitch, which was his brain's way of telling him he was invested. He dreamed about the table and the room and the presentation. Clean, strong, the kind of work that spoke for itself. He also dreamed about a rooftop, and rain that had stopped, and a woman who wasn't keeping her distance anymore. But that part he didn't examine too carefully when he woke up. Some things you had to let arrive in their own time. The second week of June, 6 days before the Hartwell pitch, was when the floor dropped out. Logan got to the office at 8:15 on a Tuesday to find an email from Davidson's assistant asking him to come to the conference room at 9. It was worded neutrally, which usually meant nothing, but the timing combined with the source meant Logan spent the walk from his desk to the 14th floor running quiet calculations. The conference room had Davidson, the two partners who'd been present for the Callaway meeting, and the head of HR. Not legal this time. Logan noted that. He sat down. Davidson said, "We've had a complaint filed." Logan had expected this. "From Callaway." "From Richard, yes." Davidson looked tired in a way that suggested he was not enjoying this. "The complaint alleges that your challenge of his analysis in the May meeting was conducted in bad faith, that you had a personal relationship with the principal of Kane Strategic that compromised your objectivity, and that you withheld this information from the company." Logan kept his face neutral. "I can respond to that. I'd like you to. I've had a professional and collegial relationship with Victoria Kane that developed in the context of our industry overlap. There's no financial entanglement, no formal partnership outside the current Hartwell initiative, which the company is aware of, and no conflict of interest that I'm aware of." He paused. "I challenged Richard's analysis because it was inaccurate. I did so using documented evidence that I've made available to legal. The accuracy of my challenge is verifiable independent of my relationship with anyone." "The Hartwell initiative," one of the partners said. "You're representing Mercer and Loft in a joint pitch with Kane Strategic?" "As a strategic partner with my billing structured through the firm, I disclosed this to Davidson 3 weeks ago when the arrangement was formalized." He looked at Davidson. "Would you like me to resend that email?" Davidson shook his head once. He'd received the email. The meeting continued for 40 minutes. Logan answered every question with the same measured accuracy. He acknowledged the collegial relationship with Victoria without apologizing for it. He documented the timeline of his awareness of Callaway's campaign. He presented the same pattern evidence that had been introduced at the May meeting. At the end, Davidson said, "I want to be clear that no formal action against you is being taken or considered based on what we've heard today. We do have an ongoing review of Richard's conduct that was already underway." "I understand," Logan said. He went back to his desk and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table. His pulse was elevated in the way it got when a close thing had just stopped being close. He texted Victoria. "Callaway filed a formal complaint against me. It's been addressed. I'm okay." Her response came back in under a minute. "I'm coming to you. You don't have to—" "I'm coming." She was at his office building in 22 minutes, which meant she'd been in a car before he'd finished objecting. She came up to his floor, and his assistant let her through because his assistant had seen Victoria Kane here twice before in recent weeks, and had made the calculation that she was someone who got through. She came into his office and closed the door and looked at him. He looked back. He wasn't going to pretend the morning hadn't been uncomfortable. "Are you okay?" she said. "Yes." "Tell me exactly what happened," he told her. She listened with her arms crossed, which was her listening posture, and her jaw tight, which was her feeling posture, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This is my fault," she said. "It isn't." "If you hadn't challenged him in May, I'd do it again," Logan said. "Victoria, I would do it again tomorrow." She looked at him. Her eyes were doing that complicated thing they did when she was feeling more than she intended to show. "You could lose your position here." "I could. I won't, based on this morning's meeting. But I could." "And you'd still—" "Yes." He said it flat and clear. "I would still do it. Can we please stop discussing whether I made the right call? Because I did, and we both know it." A long silence. She uncrossed her arms. "The pitch is in 6 days," she said. "I know. Callaway is going to try something before then. One more move." "Probably." He looked at her. "We're going to be ready." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she walked across his office and sat in the chair across from his desk and pulled out her laptop and said, "Show me where we are on the community relations deck." He opened his laptop. They worked for 3 hours, side by side in his office, building the Hartwell pitch into something that could withstand whatever came at it. Outside his window, Chicago went about its business. The river glinting, the bridges, the particular sky of early June over a Midwestern city that was doing its best. They didn't talk about Callaway again. They didn't talk about the morning or the complaint or what it had cost him. They worked because that was what they had and what they were good at. And sometimes that was what you did with people you trusted. You showed up and you worked, and the care was in the showing up. At 4 o'clock, Victoria looked at the time and said she had to get to Ethan's. "Tell him I said hi," Logan said. "He'll want a full report on the pitch outcome." "Tell him I'll call." She packed up her laptop. At the door she paused, hand on the frame, and turned back. The light from the hallway put her in partial silhouette. "Logan?" she said. "Yeah." 6 days, she said. "We get through 6 days." He nodded. 6 days. She left. He sat in his office in the quiet of a late Tuesday afternoon and looked at the work on his screen, clean, strong, honest work, and thought about what came after 6 days and what that might look like and whether he was ready for the shape of it. He thought he probably was. He thought they probably were, both of them, even if neither of them would have predicted it on a rainy night in October when he'd crouched down beside a woman on a wet curb and offered her a handkerchief. The pitch was in 6 days. He closed his laptop and went home to Maya. The 6 days before the Hartwell pitch had the compressed, pressurized quality of time that knows it matters. Logan felt it the way you feel weather changing, not dramatic, just present, a shift in atmospheric pressure that registered somewhere below conscious thought and didn't leave. He and Victoria worked in a rhythm that had taken months to develop and now ran almost without friction, which he would have found remarkable if he'd had the bandwidth to be remarked. She'd send revised sections at 11 p.m., and he'd respond by 6 a.m. with notes that weren't corrections so much as extensions, building on what she'd put down, pushing it further. She'd call during her lunch break about the community relations deck, and they'd talk for 40 minutes and hang up with something better than either of them had started with. His team handled the digital architecture. Her team handled the brand narrative. And somewhere in the middle, in the shared space of what they'd built together, there was a pitch that was genuinely the best work Logan had produced in his career. He knew it. She knew it. They didn't say so out loud, the way superstitious people don't name the thing they want in case the naming of it brings something down. Callaway was quiet those 6 days. That was the thing Logan couldn't fully read, whether the quiet was retreat or preparation. After the HR meeting, after Davidson had made it clear that the Callaway review was ongoing and formal, the man had gone professionally still. He came to meetings, contributed exactly what was required, and gave nothing away. Logan watched him the way you watched a weather system that wasn't moving, aware that stillness in a storm wasn't safety, just a different kind of waiting. Priya thought he was going to cut his losses and start building toward a graceful exit. Derek thought he might try one more thing before the Hartwell pitch and then cut his losses. Logan didn't know. He'd stopped trying to predict and started trying to be ready for anything, which was the posture of someone who'd stopped spending energy on the outcome he couldn't control and was putting it into the work he could. Maya, operating as she always did with the blunt wisdom of someone who hadn't yet learned to complicate simple things, told him on the morning of June 17th, the night before the pitch, that he looked like he was waiting for something bad to happen. "I don't," he said. "You do. You've been like this all week." She poured her own orange juice, which she'd recently decided she was old enough to do herself and would not be convinced otherwise. Like when Mrs. Patterson said she might not be able to do Thursdays anymore. "That's different. You make the same face." He looked at her. She looked back with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old who knows she's right. "I have a big presentation tomorrow," he said. "With the croissant lady?" "With Victoria, yes." Maya considered this while drinking her juice. "You'll be fine," she said. "You're good at presentations." "Thank you." "And she's smart. You always say she's smart." "She is." "Smart people do good presentations." She put her glass down with the decisive authority of a closing argument. "So you'll be fine." Logan looked at his daughter, 7 years old in her school uniform with her hair still slightly crooked from where she'd tried to fix it herself, and felt, as he often did, the specific gratitude of a person who has been handed exactly the perspective they needed. "You're right," he said. "I know." She picked up her backpack. "Can we get tacos tonight?" "Sure." "Good." She headed for the door, then turned back. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Tell Victoria good luck. But don't say good luck. Say break a leg. That's what you say." He smiled. "Where'd you learn that?" "Marcus," she said, and left. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he texted Victoria. "Maya says break a leg." The response came back 90 seconds later. "Tell her the croissant lady says thank you." Then, after a pause, "You too, Logan. Break a leg." He pocketed his phone and went to get ready for the day before the biggest pitch of his career, thinking about the shape of things. The good shape, the one that had taken a year to build from nothing. And feeling, underneath the pressure and the uncertainty and the 6 days of compressed waiting, something that was uncomplicated and solid. He was ready. Tugged. June 18th was a Monday, which felt like either good luck or bad depending on your relationship with Mondays. Chicago gave them a clear morning, the lake flat and bright under a sky that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to cooperate. Logan was in the office by 7:15. Victoria texted him at 7:22. "In car. 20 minutes. Everything is loaded and ready." The Hartwell Group had their offices in a building on the Magnificent Mile that was the kind of address that existed to communicate that you had arrived at the place where decisions got made. The presentation was at 10 a.m. They'd arranged to meet in the lobby at 9:30, do a run-through of the setup, make sure the technology was working, handle the small logistical things that always required handling. At 9:05, Logan was reviewing the final deck on his laptop in the lobby coffee area when his phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He picked up. "Mr. Pierce?" A woman's voice. Efficient, clinical. "I'm calling from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I'm trying to reach Victoria Kane. We have her listed as emergency contact for an Ethan Kane, and we've been unable to reach her on her mobile. You're listed as secondary contact." Logan stood up. "What happened?" "Mr. Kane was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago following a fall. He's conscious and stable, but he's sustained a shoulder injury and possible concussion. We need a family member." "I understand. I'll reach her immediately." He hung up, looked at the time. 9:07. The pitch was in 53 minutes. Victoria was 20 minutes away, which meant she'd be here in 13, which meant she had exactly 40 minutes to walk into the Hartwell Group's conference room and deliver the most important presentation of her professional career. Or, he called her. She picked up on the first ring. "I'm literally pulling up." "Ethan's at Northwestern Memorial," Logan said. He kept his voice even. He fell. He's conscious and stable. They can't reach you. Your mobile probably didn't show the call. Silence. Not a thinking silence. A different kind entirely. The kind a person makes when two enormous things land on them simultaneously and their whole system has to decide in real time which one to respond to. How stable, she said. Her voice was very controlled. Conscious, shoulder injury, possible concussion. They need family. She was quiet for 3 seconds. He could hear the car. He could hear her breathing, measured and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was deciding something and needed her body to cooperate. Victoria, he said, I can't. She stopped. The pitch is in 50 minutes. The Hartwell deal is... Her voice fractured on the last word. Just slightly, just enough. If we don't walk in that room at 10 o'clock, we lose the account. We lose everything we've built for the last 3 weeks. My company needs... Victoria, listen to me. Logan, I can't just... Listen, he said again, the same way he'd said her name in the kitchen those months ago when she was spinning and she went quiet. Tell your driver to take you to Northwestern, right now. Don't think about it. The pitch. I'll do it. Silence. You can't... She stopped again. It's our joint presentation. You can't walk in there and present a Kane strategic lead without, I have the deck. I know the material as well as you do, probably better in some sections. He was already moving, packing his laptop, heading for the elevator. I'll go in as strategic partner, present the integrated strategy, and give Kane Strategic the lead credit for the brand architecture. The relationship they've been building is with your team. I'll make sure Hartwell knows you're the one who built this and that you're handling a family emergency. They're going to think you sent your best strategic partner in on your behalf and that you're a professional who handles adversity. He hit the elevator button. That's actually true. A long, terrible pause. He knew what this was costing her. He knew, because he'd spent 8 months watching her operate, that the hardest thing Victoria Kane had ever learned to do was accept help. Not because she was too proud, but because she'd been burned enough times by people who offered it and then made her pay for needing it. Accepting this meant trusting him with the biggest professional moment of her career while she sat in a hospital waiting room. It meant handing the wheel to someone else while she went somewhere she couldn't control the outcome. It meant trusting him completely. The stakeholder mapping, she said suddenly. Section 4. The Bridgeport Community Liaison piece. I changed the framing last night. Make sure you use the revised version, not the one in the shared drive. I sent it to you in email at 11:40. He pulled up his email, found it. Got it. The Hartwell CFO is named Bernard Kwan. He's going to ask about the Phase 2 timeline. I have a note on slide 16, Victoria, that addresses his specific concern about the lakefront access permits, which came up in their preliminary. Victoria, firm, not impatient. I've got it. I have the deck. I have the notes. I know this material. A pause. Go to Ethan, Logan said. I'll call you when it's done. He heard her exhale. Not relief, not quite. Something more complicated than that. The sound of a person putting down something they've been holding with both hands. Logan, she said. Yeah. Don't lose it. He almost smiled. I'll do my best. She hung up. He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed and he rode up one floor to the lobby and stood for a moment with his laptop bag over his shoulder and the revised Section 4 on his phone screen, breathing steadily, recalibrating. He had 48 minutes. He went to present the best work of his career on behalf of someone else. The Hartwell Group's conference room on the 32nd floor had the view that those rooms always had. The kind of view that existed to remind you that the people sitting across the table had arrived. 4 people from Hartwell, including the CFO, Bernard Kwan, who was exactly where Victoria's notes had said he'd be, at the end of the table with the particular posture of a man who had sat through a great many pitches and was professionally skeptical of all of them. Logan introduced himself, explained Victoria's family situation briefly and without drama, the way you mentioned something real without making it a story, and watched Kwan's expression do the small recalibration of someone who'd expected one thing and gotten another. We appreciate you coming, Kwan said, neutrally. Victoria Kane built this strategy, Logan said. I'm here because she asked me to be. Everything you're about to see represents the work her team and mine developed together. I'll answer every question, but the architecture you're going to find most compelling is hers. He said it because it was true, and because sometimes the most effective thing in a room full of people measuring you was to put your ego down visibly. It was a signal about the quality of the partnership, about the kind of professional relationship Hartwell would be buying into. Quan looked at him for a moment, made a small nod. Logan opened the deck. The next 70 minutes were the kind of professional experience he'd remember for a long time, not because they were flawless, because they weren't. He stumbled on one transition between sections. The projector glitched on slide 9, and he had to manually advance 4 slides, which broke the rhythm he'd built, and it took him a minute to get it back. Quan asked 4 questions, 2 of which Logan had anticipated fully, and 2 of which required him to be honest about the limits of his immediate knowledge while pointing to where the documentation could address it. But the work was good. The work was genuinely, demonstrably good, and when the work is that good, it does its own arguing. The community relations strategy was airtight. The digital integration framework was the clearest thing Logan had ever put his name on. The brand narrative that Victoria's team had built sat underneath it all, with the solidity of something that had been thought through at every level. When he walked out at 11:52, Quan shook his hand and said, with the brevity of a man who didn't offer more than he meant, "We'll be in touch by end of week." Logan took the elevator down and stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the June morning and let himself feel the weight of the last 2 hours leaving his shoulders. Not relief exactly, more like the specific private satisfaction of having done something hard and not dropping it. He called Victoria. She picked up before the first ring finished. "Tell me." Quan said, "End of week." A pause. "That's not a no." "It's very much not a no." He paused. "The stakeholder section landed the way you designed it. Quan had exactly the question you predicted, and the framing you put together addressed it almost perfectly." She was quiet for a moment. "Almost?" "I improvised slightly on the Phase 2 timeline. I'll send you my notes on what I said in case they come back to it." "Improvised how?" "Nothing that contradicts the documentation. He paused. "I read the room, and Quan wanted more specificity than what we had written. So I gave him the more conservative timeline projection with a detailed explanation of the contingencies." "That's actually better than what I had written." "I know. I'll send you the notes." Silence. "Logan," she said, and her voice had a quality he hadn't heard before. Not the professional mode, not the processing mode, not even the carefully honest mode she reserved for the things that cost her. This was something underneath all of those, raw and unguarded in the way of someone who is past the point of managing what they're feeling. "How's Ethan?" he said. "He's okay." Her voice had a careful steadiness to it. He fell trying to reach something on a high shelf in his room. His shoulder is separated. They're going to have to fix it surgically. It's not terrible. They've seen it before with... She stopped. He kept apologizing. The whole time I was in there with him, he kept apologizing for the timing, and I kept telling him to stop, and he kept doing it anyway, because that's what he does. She stopped again. Logan waited. "He told me," she said, "that you called the hospital back before you went into the pitch, to make sure they had everything they needed to keep him comfortable until I got there." Logan hadn't thought she'd find that out. "Derek's neighbor is a physician there. I called him." "You called your attorney's neighbor." Takes 30 seconds. Another silence, the kind that had a lot in it. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours, Victoria said, "in a hospital waiting room, and I couldn't..." She took a breath. "I couldn't stop thinking about you in that room. Whether you were okay, whether the technology was cooperating, whether Quan was being difficult." A pause. "I've never had someone to think about that way before. Someone who was out there doing something on my behalf that I had to just..." She stopped. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't know how to do this," she said, and she meant all of it. Not just the pitch, not just today. The whole thing, the shape of it, the territory they'd been carefully not naming for months. "You're doing it," he said. "You're already doing it." A long quiet. "Come to the hospital," she said. He was already walking toward the parking garage. "I'm on my way." "Titset." The waiting area at Northwestern Memorial was beige and functional in the way of all hospital waiting areas, committed to neutrality in a way that stopped just short of comfort. Victoria was in a chair by the window when Logan got there. Not the window wall kind, just a regular hospital window looking out at a rooftop ventilation system. She was in the clothes she'd put on for the pitch. The blazer was folded over the chair beside her, and she'd pushed her sleeves up and her hair was down, which she never let it be during the day. She looked at him when he walked in. He looked back. He sat in the chair across from her. "Shoulder surgery is scheduled for Thursday," she said. "He's upstairs now. They're going to let me see him in about an hour." "Okay?" "He's annoyed about missing his Thursday therapy session." "Yeah, that tracks." She almost smiled. Almost. "He said to tell you he's going to need a status report on the pitch, and that, quote, you'd better have nailed it." "Tell him it went well." "I'll tell him." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "Logan, what you did today, you would have done the same." "That's not—" She shook her head. "Let me say it." He waited. "Nobody has ever—" She stopped. Tried again, because Victoria Kane was not someone who said important things badly if she could help it. "I have been handling everything by myself for a very long time. Not because I wanted to. Because I didn't know how to not do it. Because every time I let someone close enough to help, it cost me something, and I decided at some point that the cost wasn't worth it." She looked at him steadily. "You made it not cost me anything. Every time, for a year. You just—" She shook her head again. "You kept showing up and not making me pay for it." "You don't have to pay for people showing up," Logan said. "That's just showing up." "I know that now." Her voice was quiet. "I didn't always." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her, really looked at her, in the flat hospital light, without the industry armor or the operational distance or any of the careful structures they'd both been maintaining around this thing for a year. She looked tired and present and real, and she was looking back at him the same way. "Victoria," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm in love with you." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the complicated thing he'd been watching move behind them for months had settled into something clear. "I know," she said again, softer. "Have you known for a while?" "Since the hospital in February," she said. "When you bought me that terrible machine coffee and didn't say anything profound about it." She paused. "You just sat there. And I thought, this man sat in a hospital waiting room for 2 hours and bought me bad coffee and asked for nothing." A small breath. "I didn't know what to do with that." "What did you do with it?" "I filed it away and worked harder," she said, with a dry exhaustion that was also self-aware, "which is my default response to things I don't know how to handle." "I noticed." "I know you did." She looked at him. "I'm in love with you too, Logan. I have been for a while. I just didn't—" She stopped. "I was scared of it." "You told me that," he said. "Back in March, in my kitchen." "I know, you said you were too." "I was." "Are you still?" she asked. He thought about it honestly, the way he always tried to. About the year they'd built between them. Out of a rainy night, and a handkerchief and bad machine coffee, and late phone calls, and Ethan's timing, and Maya's croissant opinions, and a presentation he'd just given on behalf of someone he loved. About the terrifying, specific feeling of caring about an outcome you couldn't fully control. "Yeah," he said. "Some, but not in a way that changes anything." She nodded slowly, then she reached across the space between their chairs and put her hand over his. Not tentative, deliberate. The way Victoria did everything that mattered. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat in the beige hospital waiting room with the view of the ventilation system and didn't say anything for a while. And it was the most uncomplicated Logan had felt in longer than he could remember. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, not by a significant margin. Ethan was upstairs waiting for surgery. Calloway's review was unfinished. The Hartwell decision wasn't in yet. Nothing was clean or certain, but her hand was in his, and she'd said the thing out loud, and so had he. And those two facts sat in the room between them with the solid, quiet weight of real things finally being real. Ethan's surgery on Thursday went the way shoulder surgeries went when the facility was good and the patient was 31 and otherwise healthy, which was to say, it went fine in the clinical sense while still being the particular misery of someone you loved being wheeled into an OR and wheeled back out, looking smaller than they usually did. Victoria sat with her mother during the surgery, which added its own layer of difficulty. Their mother was having a not good day, didn't fully understand where they were or why, needed gentle, repeated explanation that wore on Victoria in ways she mostly absorbed without showing. Logan picked Maya up from school that afternoon and brought her to the hospital because Maya had asked, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to overthink care, whether she could come and bring something. What she brought was a card she'd made herself, construction paper, crayon, a drawing of what was apparently a very muscular arm with the caption, "You got this," in capital letters, and an asterisk that led to a footnote at the bottom that said, "This is about your shoulder." Ethan, post-surgery and slightly fuzzy from the anesthesia, looked at the card for a long moment and then said, with perfect deadpan through the fog, "The asterisk is what makes it art." Maya looked at Logan. "I like him," she said. "Everyone does," Logan said. Victoria was watching from the corner of the room, watching all of them, this small, strange, assembled configuration of people who had come together through a rainy night and a long year and 100 small acts of showing up. She had the expression of someone seeing something they hadn't let themselves want for a long time, now sitting right in front of them in a hospital room under fluorescent lights, imperfect and awkward and completely real. Ethan caught her expression from his bed. He looked at Logan, then back at his sister. He said nothing, because timing was everything, and this wasn't the moment. But he smiled, the real one, not the performance one, and Logan saw it and understood it. End of week came on Friday. Logan was in his office at 4:15 when his phone rang. Victoria, which wasn't the call he'd been waiting for, but close. "Quan called," she said, 5 minutes ago. Logan stopped moving. "And?" "We got it," he exhaled. "Victoria, Lakeside Commons, full contract, brand strategy and integrated campaign, 12-month initial engagement with a renewal option." Her voice had the particular quality of someone who has been working toward something for a long time and is now standing at the place they were working toward and still hasn't fully absorbed it. "We got it, Logan. You built it," he said. "You built the whole thing." "We built it." He let that sit. "Okay. We built it." A pause. He could hear her breathing change, not the controlled operational breathing, the other kind. "I need to call Ethan," she said, "and I need to—" She stopped. "I think I might be about to cry, which is inconvenient because I'm at the office." "Go to the bathroom," he said. "I'm the CEO." CEOs use bathrooms. A short sound that was half laugh, half genuine emotional overwhelm. "I hate this." "No, you don't." "I really don't," she said quietly. Then, "Thank you. For the pitch. For everything that led to the pitch. For, She stopped. "I'm going to go cry in the bathroom of my own company. Call me after Ethan." "I will." A pause. "Logan." "Yeah. This is the first time in a long time that something good happened, and my first instinct was to call you." She said it simply, like a fact she'd just identified. "I didn't have to think about it. I just called." He sat in his office and let that be as big as it was. "Same," he said. She hung up. He sat for a moment, then called Davidson. He spent the next 30 minutes handling the professional architecture of the Hartwell win. Notifications, documentation, the internal structure of how the joint contract would be managed. Davidson was more than satisfied, and whatever lingering awkwardness had existed since the Callaway situation was substantially dissolved by the arrival of a significant new account. He didn't think about Callaway. Callaway was Davidson's problem now, and Derek's problem, and the formal review's problem. Logan had done what he could do, and the rest was in motion. He let it be in motion. He texted Maya's after-school caregiver to let her know he'd be home by 6. He packed his laptop. He stood at his office window for a minute, looking at the river and the bridges and the city doing its early evening settling, the light going amber over the water. He thought about the year, thought about a rainy October night and a handkerchief and a woman who'd looked at him like she was trying to figure out what species he was. Thought about late calls in hospital waiting rooms and a 7-year-old's construction paper card with an asterisk. Thought about standing in a conference room on the 32nd floor and presenting someone else's vision with everything he had, and the fact that it hadn't felt like sacrifice. It had felt like something he'd chosen freely, which was different, which was the whole difference. He was happy. Not the uncomplicated version that movies suggested was available to people who got things right. The actual version, complicated by everything it had cost and everything it was still going to require, and the specific ongoing work of loving someone who was also figuring it out, alongside a kid who needed him present, and a career that was demanding, and a city that didn't care about any of it. The real version. Which was, he'd decided somewhere along the way, the only version worth having. He went home to Maya. The following week, when Ethan was home from the hospital and set up in his apartment with post-surgical care arranged and a new grudge against high shelves, Victoria came over for dinner again. Not because there was an occasion or a reason, because she came now, the way people come when they have a place where they're comfortable. Maya had claimed her as a presence without making a formal announcement about it, and the way children established facts through behavior rather than declaration. Dinner this time was tacos, which Maya had been angling for since June 17th. The three of them sat at the kitchen table, and Maya distributed taco shells with the seriousness of a woman who understood that distribution affected outcomes. And they ate, and the conversation moved the way it moved when people knew each other, without effort, without performance, wandering from Ethan's shoulder to a school project to whether Chicago-style pizza was technically pizza or something else entirely, a debate which Maya entered with the force of someone who had opinions she'd been waiting to deploy. "It's pizza," Maya said. "Architecturally, it's more of a casserole," Victoria said. Maya stared at her. "A casserole. The structure, it has cheese on it. Casseroles have cheese on them." "It's pizza," Maya said, with the finality of a judge. She pointed her taco at Logan. "Tell her." "It's a very good question," Logan said carefully. Both of them looked at him with identical expressions of mild disappointment. He held up his hands. "I'm staying out of it." "Coward?" Victoria said pleasantly. "Daddy's a coward," Maya agreed, and bit into her taco. Logan sat in his kitchen with these two people, his daughter and the woman he loved, and the completely ordinary chaos of a Tuesday dinner, and felt the shape of things so clearly it was almost physical. Not the shape he'd been working toward in the abstract, the picture he'd described to Victoria on the phone all those months ago. The actual shape, imperfect and specific and real. Taco shells, and a Chicago pizza debate, and a 7-year-old deploying her opinions like precision instruments. After dinner, while Maya did homework, Victoria sat on the kitchen counter, which she'd started doing sometime in the last month, just perching there while he cleaned up, talking or not talking, present in the easy way of someone who had stopped performing and started just being. And she was looking at her phone, scrolling through something work-related that she'd put down 3 times already and kept coming back to. "Put it down," he said. "I just need to—" "Victoria." She looked up. He was at the sink, hands wet, looking at her. She looked back. Then she put the phone down on the counter and left it there. "Thank you," he said. "You're bossy," she said. "You like it." A pause. Marginally. But she was almost smiling, and he could see it. He finished the dishes. She stayed on the counter. From the table, Maya was explaining something about her homework to herself in a running, quiet commentary that had become the background sound of evenings in this apartment. "Hey," Victoria said. He looked up. "I called my mother today," she said, carefully. "She was having a good day." "Yeah?" "She knew me. We talked for 20 minutes. She looked at her phone, then away. She asked if I was happy. He waited. "I told her yes," Victoria said. She paused. "I didn't have to think about it, which is—" She shook her head slightly. "That's new. I've been saying I'm fine for so long that actually answering that question honestly felt strange." "What did she say?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She said she could tell. She said my voice sounded different. A pause. Then she told me Ethan had called her and told her about you, and she wanted to know when she was going to meet you. Logan looked at her. What did you tell her? I told her soon. She met his eyes. If that's okay. That's more than okay, he said. She nodded, looked at her hands. He could see something moving through her, not the complicated processing kind of movement, something simpler, like a person getting used to good news, which took its own time and had its own rhythm. Logan, she said. Yeah. I want to stop being scared of it. You're already mostly not scared of it, he said. You've been building the whole time. I know, but I want to... She looked for the words. I want to stop having the scared part at all. I want it to be just... She gestured vaguely. At the kitchen, at the space. This. It takes time, he said. It took me time. It doesn't come all at once. Does it stop? The scared part? He thought about it honestly. Mostly, it doesn't go all the way away, but it gets quieter. And eventually the other thing is louder than it. She sat with that. What's the other thing? She asked. He looked at her on his kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, phone face down, work put away, present in the easy, real way she was getting better at being, and thought about how to say it correctly. Certainty, he said, that this is the right place to be. She was quiet for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. From the table, Maya muttered something about fractions. The city outside did its evening frequency. Yeah, Victoria said finally, quietly. Okay. She picked up her glass of water. He went back to the last of the dishes. And it wasn't cinematic or resolved or particularly remarkable from the outside. Just a Tuesday night in a Chicago apartment, 2 people in a kitchen, a kid doing math homework at the table. But it was the right shape, the one he'd described and the one she'd said she didn't know how to build. They were both standing in it now, a little uncertain, a little unfinished, figuring it out as they went. Which was, he'd come to understand, how the good things actually worked. The Callaway investigation concluded on a Thursday in late July, which was the kind of day Chicago did well. Humid and bright, the city radiating heat off the pavement in visible waves, the lake somewhere to the east offering the theoretical promise of a breeze that hadn't arrived yet. Logan found out from Davidson, who called him into the 14th floor conference room at 2 in the afternoon with the particular quietness of a man delivering a verdict he'd spent time on. The room was just the 2 of them this time. No partners, no legal, no HR. Davidson sat across from him with a folder he didn't open and looked at Logan with the expression of someone who had reached a conclusion they wished had been unnecessary. Richard Callaway has resigned, Davidson said, effective immediately. Logan didn't say anything. The investigation found a pattern of conduct that included the fabrication of financial data, a sustained campaign of reputational undermining against a business partner, and the filing of a retaliatory complaint against a colleague in response to being challenged. Davidson paused. Legal is reviewing whether there's civil exposure. That's not our department. Okay, Logan said. I also want to acknowledge, Davidson said more carefully, that you identified this situation early, handled it with more restraint than I would have expected from most people in your position, and brought it to resolution in a way that protected the company's interests and yours. He paused again. And hers. Logan looked at him. She's a legitimate business partner. I know that now. Davidson held his gaze. I should have looked more carefully earlier. That's on me. It was the closest thing to an apology Davidson had probably offered anyone in his professional life, and Logan received it the way it was meant, as a real thing, from a man who didn't make gestures he didn't mean. The Hartwell account, Davidson said, shifting. I'd like to talk about the structure going forward. The joint arrangement with Kane Strategic is working, Logan said. Well, I'm aware. I'd like it to continue formally, with appropriate documentation and a clear framework. He opened the folder for the first time. I've had legal draft a partnership framework. I'd like you to review it and pass it to Kane Strategic's counsel. Logan took the folder, looked at the first page. It was fair. More than fair, actually. The revenue split was equitable. The credit attribution was explicit. The framework gave both companies operational independence while formalizing the collaboration. It was the kind of document that protected everyone involved, which was the kind of document Logan had stopped expecting from rooms like this one. "I'll get it to her today," he said. Davidson nodded. The meeting was over in 9 minutes total, which was approximately the right length for a meeting that had been 9 months in the making. Walking back to his office, Logan thought about the specific texture of having something resolved. Not the triumphant version from stories where resolution felt like a door slamming definitively, more like the real version, a weight that had been present for so long you'd stopped noticing the exact shape of it, now absent, and the absence was mostly what you noticed, the space where the weight had been. He texted Victoria. Calloway resigned. Investigation concluded. Davidson sent a partnership framework. "I'm forwarding it to you now." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Are you okay?" He smiled at his phone. 6 months ago, she would have asked about the legal implications first. Now she asked if he was okay. He thought that was probably the most accurate measure of everything that had changed. "Yes," he typed. "You?" Her response? "Better than I've been in a while. Come to dinner tonight. Ethan wants to celebrate." He pocketed his phone and went back to his desk and worked through the afternoon with a focus that felt different from the compressed, pressurized focus of the last several months. Cleaner, like a window that had been wiped. Ethan's apartment was on the north side, a ground-floor unit with a wide doorway and a layout that worked, and he'd made it his own in the way of someone who had decided that his environment was going to reflect his actual personality rather than an accommodation. Bookshelves everywhere, a ridiculous amount of them, organized in a system that made sense only to Ethan. A sound system that cost more than Logan's monthly car payment. Artwork on the walls that was genuinely good. A friend from college who'd become a real artist, Ethan had explained once, and who gave him pieces because Ethan had believed in him before anyone else did. Victoria had cooked, which she did rarely, and with the same precision she brought to everything. Not elaborate, but exact. Pasta, a green salad, good bread from the bakery 2 blocks from her office. She was in the kitchen when Logan arrived, and she handed him a glass of wine without looking up from what she was doing and said, "Stir this." He stirred it. Ethan wheeled in from the living room with the easy navigation of someone who knew every inch of his own space and said, "You're doing that wrong. I'm stirring pasta. You're stirring like someone who's thinking about something else." He positioned himself at the kitchen island. "What are you thinking about?" "The Calloway situation," Logan admitted, "trying to figure out why it doesn't feel as done as I thought it would." Ethan looked at him. "Because you spent 9 months in combat mode, and your brain hasn't gotten the memo that the combat's over." "Maybe." "That's not a maybe. That's how it works. You run at a threat for that long, and your nervous system gets attached to the running." He reached for the bread and tore a piece. "It'll catch up. Give it a week." Victoria glanced over her shoulder at Logan. He shrugged, because Ethan was right, and they both knew it. "The partnership framework Davidson sent," Victoria said, back to the stove. "I had my attorney look at it. And? It's genuinely fair." She said it with the slight surprise of someone who'd been handed fairness from a direction she hadn't expected it. "I'm going to want to adjust the language on 2 clauses. I'll send you the red line, but overall," she paused, "it's a good foundation." "Davidson's not a bad person," Logan said. "He just moves slowly and trusts the wrong people sometimes." "Most people do," Ethan said. He was looking at the bread. "Trust the wrong people. It's basically the human condition." "You trust too easily," Victoria told him. "I trust correctly and then get disappointed," Ethan said with dignity. "That's different. It results in the same thing." "It does not. One is a character flaw, the other is an optimism that the world occasionally fails to reward." He looked at Logan. "Am I right?" "I'm staying out of it," Logan said. "Still a coward," Ethan said approvingly. "Consistent." They ate dinner at Ethan's table with the good dishes he'd inherited from their grandmother that he used regularly, refusing the logic that good things should be saved for occasions. He'd said once that after the accident he'd made a decision to use everything, every good dish, every decent bottle, every afternoon that wasn't raining. Logan had thought about that more than once. It was the kind of decision that looked simple from the outside, and was probably one of the hardest ones a person could make. The conversation at dinner moved the way it moved between people who knew each other past the performing stage, easily, without direction, circling back to things mid-sentence. Ethan's shoulder, which was healing correctly but slowly, and which he was approaching with the patient pragmatism of someone who'd already rebuilt his relationship with his body once and knew how the process went. The Lakeside Commons project, now officially in motion, with a kickoff meeting scheduled for mid-August. Maya's current theory about competitive baking, which Logan had relayed to Ethan in enough detail that Ethan had opinions. Their mother, who was having a better stretch, not the memory, that didn't change, but her mood, her comfort, the particular quality of the good days when they came. She asked about you again, Victoria said to Logan across the table. Last Sunday. What did she ask? Whether you were good to me. Victoria said it directly, no performance around it. I told her yes. What did she say? Victoria looked at him with a small, unguarded smile. She said she could tell. She said I sound like her when she was my age and my father was around. She looked down at her plate. She doesn't always remember his name now, but she remembers what it felt like. The table was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind, the full kind. The kind that meant something had landed and everyone was letting it be there. Ethan, who understood timing better than anyone Logan had met, picked up the breadbasket and offered it around and said, "More bread?" with such perfect deflective warmth that Logan could have kissed him for it. The meeting with their mother happened on a Sunday in early August. Logan hadn't been anxious about it exactly, but he'd been aware of it in the way you were aware of things that mattered. The appointment on the calendar that you didn't forget about even when you weren't looking at it. Margaret Kane lived in a memory care facility on the North Shore that was well-run and comfortable, the kind of place that had spent real money on making the environment feel like a home rather than an institution, with gardens that residents could access and staff who knew everyone's history. Victoria picked Logan up at 10, and they drove up together, and she talked on the drive about things adjacent to where they were going. The Lakeside Commons kickoff meeting, Ethan's next follow-up appointment, a book she'd been reading about urban infrastructure that she kept wanting to tell him about. He listened and responded and understood that the talking was part of how she managed the approach, how she kept herself even and present rather than letting the anticipatory weight of it take over. He knew this about her now. He knew the talking through things and the particular silence that meant she was done processing and had arrived somewhere. He knew the way her voice changed when she was genuinely worried versus managing worry. He knew she drank her coffee without sugar, but would steal his when he had sugar in it, which she denied. He knew she texted Ethan good morning every single day without exception, and that she kept a photograph of her father in the drawer of her nightstand, not on display, and that she'd never explained this and he'd never asked because some things were private in a way that didn't need bridging. He knew that she was brave in a way that didn't announce itself, and that was the kind of bravery that actually held. Margaret Kane was in the garden when they arrived. A small woman in a cotton blouse, white-haired, with the fine-boned quality of someone whose face showed exactly who they'd been when they were young. She was sitting with a staff member, looking at something in the flower bed with the focused attention of someone who found the specific detail of a thing genuinely interesting. She looked up when Victoria came through the garden gate, and her face did something Logan had seen before, only in movies, and didn't quite believe in real life. The pure, uncomplicated light of a person who has seen the specific face they love most. "Vicky," she said, the way people say names they've said 10,000 times. Victoria bent down and hugged her mother and stayed there for a moment, and Logan stood back and let the moment be itself, without putting himself in it. Then Margaret Kane looked at him. Her eyes were clear today. Victoria had said she'd been having a better week, and you could see it, the quality of her attention. She looked at Logan the way older women of a certain kind looked at people who mattered to their children. Thorough, without apology, measuring something she didn't articulate. "This is Logan," Victoria said, straightening. "I know," her mother said, which surprised them both. "Ethan showed me a picture." Victoria looked at Logan. He looked back. "Of course he did," she said. Margaret Kane extended her hand to Logan with the formality of someone who believed in doing things correctly, and he shook it, and she held his hand a moment longer than a handshake required, studying him. "Sit down," she said. It wasn't a question. He sat. Victoria sat beside her mother. The staff member quietly found something else to do. They sat in the garden for an hour and 20 minutes. Margaret Kane's clarity ebbed and flowed the way Victoria had described, fully present in a sentence, then somewhere slightly elsewhere for a moment, then back. She talked about the garden, which she cared about. She talked about a program she watched on television that she found instructive. She talked about Victoria as a child, specifically and sharply, the way memories from long ago stayed clear even when recent ones didn't. And Logan listened to these stories with the attention of someone being handed something valuable and understanding it as such. She talked about Victoria's father, not by name, the name came and went, but as a presence, as a feeling. She said, "He made everything feel like it was going to be manageable." She said, "I didn't realize that was a rare thing until he was gone." She looked at Logan when she said it. He held her gaze and didn't look away. Before they left, Margaret Kane took Victoria's hand and held it, and said something to her quietly that Logan didn't hear. And Victoria's face did the thing it did when something moved through her that she was holding carefully. The contained quality, the deliberate stillness of someone keeping themselves together. She pressed her mother's hand and said something back that Logan also didn't hear. In the car driving home, Victoria was quiet for a long time. He drove without pushing it. "She told me," Victoria said eventually, looking out the window, "that I looked like someone who had put something down." A pause. "A burden. She said I'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and she could see I'd put it down." He glanced at her. She was still looking at the window. "She's right," Victoria said. I have put some of it down." Her voice was careful and real. "I don't know if I realized how much of it I was carrying until someone helped me carry it." Logan kept his eyes on the road. "You did most of it yourself." "I know I did. But there's a difference between doing things alone because you have to and doing things alone because you believe it's the only way." She turned to look at him. "I believed it was the only way for a long time." "And now?" She looked at him for a moment. "Now I know it isn't." She turned back to the window. "That's not a small thing to learn." "No," he said, "it isn't." They drove back to the city with the late summer afternoon going gold around them, and Logan thought about what it meant to put something down. Not to abandon it, not to decide it didn't matter, but to shift the weight so that both hands were free. He thought about what it had cost her to learn that, and how long it had taken, and how quietly the learning had happened, incremental and real, over dinners and phone calls and hospital waiting rooms, and a year of two people refusing to let each other be alone in the things that were hard. He thought, this is what love actually looks like when it isn't performing, when it's just two people, imperfect and carrying things, figuring out how to carry them together. August moved into September the way the end of summer always did in Chicago, reluctantly, with a few last hot days that felt like the city was holding its breath before giving in. The Lakeside Commons kickoff went well, which was the mild professional language for a meeting that was, by any real measure, the beginning of something significant. Both teams were sharp. The Hartwell Group's people were engaged and communicative in the way of clients who had bought in rather than clients who were watching critically. The work that Logan and Victoria had built together over 3 weeks in May held up under the scrutiny of a room full of people who were paid to find problems. Afterward, in the parking structure outside the Hartwell building, Victoria looked at Logan and said, "We're going to do good work on this." "We are," he agreed. "I mean genuinely good work, the kind that means something beyond the contract." He understood what she meant. The Lakeside Commons development touched communities that had complicated relationships with development. The history of lakefront projects in Chicago was layered with decisions that had served some people well and others not at all. The community relations strategy they'd built was designed to actually engage rather than perform engagement, which was harder and slower and more honest. It was the kind of work that had required both of them arguing for it in rooms where it would have been easier to take a more expedient approach. "I know," he said. "That's why we fought for the Bridgeport section the way we did." She nodded. Then, unexpectedly, "Thank you for pushing back on my initial framing. In April, when I had the community engagement scoped too narrowly." He looked at her. "You're thanking me for an argument we had 4 months ago." "I'm thanking you for being right when I was wrong," she said, with the directness she'd gotten better at, "which I wasn't very graceful about at the time." "You were pretty graceful. I told you that your framing was overly idealistic and would cost us timeline. You were right about the timeline. You were right about everything else. She held his gaze. I've been thinking about that, about how I handle being wrong. I'm better at it than I used to be. You are, he said honestly. You make it easier. She said it simply, without making it romantic. Just factual. You don't punish people for being wrong. You just move to what's right. He thought about Maya, who had learned the same thing from him without him teaching it directly, who had absorbed it somehow from watching how he handled mistakes, his own and hers and other people's. He thought about his father, who had been the same way, who had operated on the principle that the point of identifying an error was to correct it, not to establish whose fault it was. My dad was like that, he said. He didn't see much use in blame. Smart man. He was. Logan paused. He would have liked you. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Would he have? He liked people who meant what they said. He had very little patience for performance. He looked at her. You'd have driven him slightly crazy at first, and then he'd have decided you were one of his favorite people. She smiled. The real one. That sounds about right for how I tend to go. The rooftop was Victoria's idea, and it happened on an evening in late September that Logan would think about for a long time afterward, not because it was dramatic, but because of the specific, quiet completeness of it. She texted him on a Friday. Are you free tonight? He was. Mrs. Patterson had Maya for the weekend, a standing arrangement for the first weekend of each month that Maya had decided was fine, as long as she got to take her stuffed animals and have the special breakfast Mrs. Patterson made on Saturday mornings that was better than anything Logan produced. Yes, he texted back. What did you have in mind? Her response? The rooftop bar where everything started. I want to go back. He understood immediately. Not sentimentality. Victoria wasn't sentimental in the conventional sense, but she was precise about meaning, and this had meaning. A year ago on a rainy night in October, they had both been at that bar, on opposite sides of the industry event that it was, and everything had started there even though neither of them had been looking for a start. He picked her up at 7. She was wearing something different from her usual professional armor, darker, simpler, the kind of thing a person wore when they weren't going somewhere to be seen. Her hair was down. He'd gotten used to that. She'd gotten used to letting him. The bar was on the roof of a building on the river, and on a clear September Friday evening in Chicago, the city from that height was the version of itself it got to be without anyone planning it, honest and lit and enormous, the lake visible in the distance as a darker darkness against the sky, the bridges, the river catching reflections. It was not raining this time. The air had the cool clarity of early autumn, that specific quality of a city that had survived another summer and was now getting into the good weather. They got a table by the railing, outside, away from the main crowd, ordered drinks, sat with the city around them. I was sitting down there, Victoria said, looking at the street below. On the curb. I know, I almost walked past. She looked at him. Why didn't you? You made a sound, he said, and I knew what it was. She was quiet. It was the sound of something that had been held in for too long, letting a little bit out, he said. I knew it because I'd made it myself, and I couldn't walk past someone making that sound. I didn't want you to see me like that, she said. I know. She looked at the street below. I was so embarrassed, not just because of the crying and the broken shoe and all of it, but because you of all people. She shook her head. You were the last person I would have chosen. I know that too. And you turned out to be the right one. She said it without irony, just fact. That's the part I've been thinking about. How I spent 3 years deciding exactly what you were, and I was wrong in every way that mattered. You weren't entirely wrong, he said. I was competitive. I was trying to outmaneuver you professionally. So was I. A pause. But that was the surface. Underneath, she looked at him. Underneath, we were the same kind of person. And I think I knew it, some part of me, and that's why I worked so hard to maintain the rivalry. Because if I admitted we were the same kind of person, I'd have to admit I didn't actually dislike you. And what would that have meant? She smiled, small and honest. It would have meant I had a lot of feelings I wasn't prepared to have. He looked at her in the early evening light, the city behind her, her hair down, a glass in her hand, looking back at him without any of the architecture she'd spent years building. He thought about October and February and June and every phone call in between. About the way she'd taken his hand in the hospital waiting room, deliberate, like a choice. About the kitchen counter and the taco dinner and her mother's garden and the way Margaret Kane had held his hand a moment too long, measuring something. He thought about what it meant that the hardest, most difficult, most inconvenient person in his professional life had turned out to be the one who understood him best. "I have something to say to you," he said. She waited. She was good at waiting now. "I've been in love with you for about 8 months," he said. "I know I told you in the hospital, and I know we've been—" He searched for the right word. "Finding our feet," she offered. "Finding our feet, yes." He looked at her. "But I want to say it clearly and without anything else attached to it. Not in a crisis, not when something's happening, just because it's true and you should hear it plainly." He paused. "I love you. The whole version of you. The one who runs a company, and the one who calls her brother every day, and the one who can't stop working, and the one who steals my coffee, and the one who had no idea what to do with 45 free minutes. All of it." She looked at him for a long moment. The city did its thing behind her. The lake was dark and vast in the distance. "I've been practicing saying it," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I know, it's ridiculous." She looked slightly embarrassed, which on Victoria was a rare and entirely human thing. "I've been saying it to myself in the car, to practice, because I knew I wanted to say it to you properly, and when I feel things strongly, I tend to either not say them at all or say them badly, and I didn't want to do either." "How's the practicing going?" "The practicing is fine. It's the actual saying it that's the problem." She took a breath, not dramatic, just necessary. "I love you." "That part's easy, actually. I've known it for a while." She paused. "The part I've been practicing is this. I love you, and I'm not scared of it anymore. Or I am, a little, but the scared part is just—" She looked for the word. "Background noise now. It doesn't run the show." He looked at her. "Background noise." "You're the foreground," she said. "You and Ethan and your ridiculous daughter and the work we're doing, and—" She gestured at the city, at the space around them. This is the foreground." He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. She'd been letting him for months now, and it still had a quality of deliberateness to it. A choice, each time, not a habit. He thought he'd probably always loved that about her. "The croissant lady," he said. She laughed. "The real one. The full one. I am never going to escape that." Maya is very committed to the naming convention. "I've noticed." She squeezed his hand. "For the record, I asked her about it. She explained that it means she thinks about me in a good way. She said she only names people she likes." "She's right." "I know." Her voice went softer. She stopped, started again. "She's very much her father's daughter. She pays attention to the things that matter, and she's honest about what she thinks, and she doesn't make you feel like a project." She looked at him. "You raised that. She didn't come with those things pre-installed." "She came with most of them," Logan said. "I just tried not to train them out of her." Victoria shook her head slightly, the way she did when she disagreed with his modesty about something. She let it go. She'd gotten better at picking battles, he'd noticed, knowing when to push and when to receive a thing for what it was. They stayed on the rooftop for 3 hours. They talked and sometimes didn't talk. The city went through its evening changes below them, the shift from commuter traffic to dinner crowd to the late-night energy of a Friday. The lights came up across the skyline as the dark deepened. Somewhere to the east, the lake was doing whatever the lake did at night, moving in the dark, enormous and indifferent to everything going on along its shore. Logan thought about the year, thought about all the conversations that had happened in cars and kitchens and hospital waiting rooms and conference rooms and a parking garage where he'd once stood and eaten half a sandwich while telling himself this was manageable. Thought about the person he'd been 12 months ago, capable, careful, doing fine in the Maya-specific way, but carrying the particular solitude of someone who had stopped expecting to find another person who fit. He hadn't been looking for her. He'd been walking to his car in the rain, and here was the thing about that, the thing he'd been turning over in his mind for months and had found no better way to say than simply, sometimes the most significant things in a life happened sideways. Not through the door you'd been standing in front of, working up the courage to knock. Through a different door entirely, one you almost walked past. The ones you almost walked past. "Hey," Victoria said. He looked at her. "Where'd you go?" "Here," he said. "I'm here." She looked at him for a moment, assessing the way she still did, the habit of a woman who had learned not to take things at face value. Then she nodded, satisfied. Okay. She was getting better at that too, taking him at his word. He wasn't sure if it was faith in him specifically or a more general expansion of the territory she was willing to trust. Maybe both. Maybe they were the same thing by now. But in October, the Lakeside Commons campaign launched publicly. Victoria stood at the press event in a room full of journalists and city officials and development stakeholders and presented the community engagement framework with the precise, warm authority she'd always had. But different now, in a way only Logan could have identified. There was something under the professionalism that had always been there but had been managed so carefully it was almost invisible. Now it was visible. She talked about the Bridgeport Community Liaison Program, and you could see that she actually cared about it, that it wasn't language she was performing, that somewhere in the building of this campaign, she'd let the work mean something to her, rather than just executing it correctly. Afterward, in the lobby, Ethan, who had come because Ethan came to the things that mattered, said to Logan quietly, "She looks different." "I know." "Good different." "Yeah," Logan said. "Good different." Ethan looked at him with the same direct, open quality he'd had that first Saturday over Banh Mi, when he'd said she called you on a Saturday morning and she doesn't do that. "Thank you," he said. Not performed, not elaborate, just that. Logan shook his head. "She did the work. I just showed up." "That's the whole thing, though," Ethan said. "That's the whole thing. Showing up." He looked at his sister across the room, talking to a city official with the focused attention she gave to everyone who was talking to her. She didn't have anyone who just showed up for a long time. She does now. Ethan looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "She does." Victoria caught Logan's eye from across the room, the quick acknowledging look of two people who were in the same space and aware of each other in the specific way of people whose awareness had become necessary. He gave her the small nod that meant, "I see you. You're doing great. This is good." She turned back to her conversation. He stood with Ethan and drank bad lobby coffee and felt, in the mid-October afternoon of a year that had taken things from him and given him things he hadn't anticipated and surprised him in directions he'd stopped expecting, the particular and profound ordinariness of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because it was perfect. It wasn't. The Lakeside Commons project was going to have hard months. Community engagement work always did. There were real tensions and real history in the neighborhoods they were working with and real consequences to getting it wrong. The partnership between his firm and Victoria's was formalized, but still new, still finding its rhythms. Ethan's shoulder was healing, but the recovery was slow and frustrating in the way recoveries were. Their mother would have bad days and good days in no predictable order, and that would always be part of the territory. Maya was 8 now and had opinions about everything, including opinions about her parents' adult lives that were delivered with 7-year-old certainty and occasional spectacular incorrectness. Victoria was still learning how to stop, and Logan was still learning how to let someone carry things with him rather than doing it all himself, and they were both imperfect at it in different ways. None of it was clean, all of it was real. That was the thing he'd stopped being afraid of, the realness of it. The way real things had weight and edges and required ongoing attention. The way you couldn't build something that mattered and then stop paying attention to it and expect it to hold. The way loving people, actually loving them, meant showing up on the bad days and the boring days and the days when nothing was resolved, not just the days when things were clear. He'd known this theoretically, the way you knew things before you'd actually lived them. He knew it differently now. But on a Sunday in late October, almost exactly a year after the rain, Logan and Victoria took Maya to Navy Pier. It had been Maya's request, lodged with the persistence of a child who had learned that the right strategy was not to ask once loudly, but to mention a thing with regularity until it became the obvious next step. She wanted the Ferris wheel. She'd wanted it since Victoria had mentioned once over dinner that her mother used to take her and Ethan there. Maya had looked at Victoria with the solemn understanding of a child who had grasped the weight of a thing. "We should go," she'd said simply, not as a request, as a statement of what should happen. And so they went. The lake was doing its autumn version, dark and choppy, the wind off the water cold enough to mean business, the pier less crowded than it was in summer but still alive. The particular community of people who came to the waterfront in October because they wanted the specific view and the specific air and were willing to be cold for it. Maya wore the heaviest coat she owned and still complained about the cold for approximately 6 minutes before becoming completely absorbed in the environment, which was how she handled most things that were initially inconvenient. She led them toward the Ferris wheel with the purposeful navigation of a small person who had a destination. They got in the gondola, Victoria and Logan on one side, Maya on the other, her face already turned toward the window before they'd even started moving. The wheel lifted them slow and enormous over the city, over the lake, into the October sky. "You can see everything," Maya said, pressed to the glass. "Almost everything," Victoria said. Maya turned to look at her. Then she said, with the sideways accuracy of a child who had been listening more carefully than anyone realized, "My dad says the lake is one of those things that makes you feel small in a good way." Victoria looked at Logan. He looked back. "He's right," Victoria said. "He usually is," Maya said, turning back to the window. "Don't tell him I said that." Logan felt the laugh before it came out. Real and unguarded. The kind that caught you off guard, and you couldn't manage back down. Victoria was already smiling beside him, the real one, and she shook her head slightly, and he took her hand the way he did now, naturally, without announcement, because it was just where his hand went, and she held it without looking away from the window. Below them, the city spread out in every direction. The lake moved in the way it always moved, indifferent and enormous, doing what it had been doing since long before any of them, and would keep doing long after. The pier was below them, the bridges, the river, the buildings going up, and the ones that had been there forever. All of Chicago, in the particular October light that was almost gold, almost the end of something, almost the beginning. Maya pressed her face against the glass and said, to no one in particular, "I want to stay up here for a while." "We can do that," Logan said. "Good." She settled back, then, with the easy certainty of a child who sees things clearly. "This is my favorite day." The wheel kept turning. The city held still below them. Victoria leaned her shoulder against Logan's, easy and present, and he felt the weight of it. Not the burden kind, the good kind, the kind that meant someone was there. He thought about a woman sitting on a wet curb on a rainy night. He thought about everything it had taken to get from there to here. All the phone calls and the hard conversations and the moments when it would have been easier to stay in the safer, smaller version of things. He thought about all the ways this could have not happened. The door he'd almost walked past. He'd walked through it instead. And here was what he'd learned, in a year of learning things he hadn't known he needed to know. The people who are hardest to reach are sometimes that way because they've been failed by reaching before. The ones who look like they need nothing are often the ones who've needed everything and stopped asking. The ones who fight you hardest at the beginning are sometimes the ones who will stand alongside you most completely in the end, once they believe you're going to stay. And the most significant thing a person could do, not the most dramatic, not the most eloquent, but the most significant, was to show up, again and again and again, without keeping score, without making the other person pay for needing you. Just showing up and saying, with your presence, with your attention, with your willingness to sit in hospital waiting rooms and buy bad coffee and go to Navy Pier in October and stir pasta and argue about deep dish. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Let me help you carry it." That was the whole thing. That was all of it. The Ferris wheel completed its arc and started down, and Maya turned from the window to look at both of them with the clear, uncomplicated satisfaction of a child who has exactly what she wanted. And the city came back up around them, and Victoria squeezed his hand once, and Logan Pierce looked at the life he had somehow, sideways and unplanned, and on a rainy night in October, built his way into and thought simply and completely, this is it. This is the shape of it. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.